Hello, Amber. Welcome back to part 3. Here we go. Chapter 21. My voice echoed in the still night air. Helen, I said again. Where you're sitting, it's not safe. You could fall. She turned her head. Can you leave me alone, please? I don't think I should. I just want to. I need a minute. And then you'll come down? She shook her head. I felt myself shiver. If you're thinking about jumping, please don't. She didn't answer. You might not kill yourself, I said. You can't be sure. Not from this height. You might just be horribly maimed. Paralysed. Spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair with Annabelle Mercer pushing you around, you know. She let out a strangled cry, a half sob, half laugh. Come on, I said gently. Things can't be that bad. Oh yeah? You want to bet? She picked up a wine bottle, a bottle of wine that was on the wall next to her, tipped her head back and took a long slug. Do you want to talk about it? She shook her head. There's nothing to say. I fucked up everything. I've really, royally fucked up. How have you fucked up? I saw her inch towards the edge. Look, I said quickly. My life's a complete car wreck. I should be the one jumping. She didn't answer. Seriously, I'm an out-of-work actress / office temp / dog body. I live on my own with my cat, and instead of making up some great, undespicable shit about myself down there, like I should have done, I've just gone and told a stupid pack of lies and shown everyone what a bloody loser I am. What did you tell them? That I'm dating a famous actor? Are you? No, I don't even have a boyfriend. Everyone is so fucking successful, she said. I don't know why the fuck I can. Me neither, but trust me, you won't find a bigger loser here than me. She didn't argue, which hurt a little, but at least her balance was now weighed towards me, rather than towards the edge of the wall. What have you been in then? She asked. What? You said you're an actress. I shrugged. One advert, years ago, Carpet Palace. I was the woman on the flying carpet that flew into the couple's living room. She didn't reply. No, I sighed. That's it, really. I haven't had any decent work in years. I'm 21 grand in debt and I'm still qualified to do anything except act. Actually, that's not true. I have OCR level 2 typing, but my speed sucks and I have RSI. So, I do a lot of photocopying and scanning and shredding, which I was aware that I was gabbling will be really useful as research if I ever get a part as an insanely bored office temp. But in the meantime, it's totally, insanely fucking boring. And guess what? My brothers and sisters are all married with kids and they're all, like, multi-millionaires. She turned to face me. Really? I nodded. Yep, every one of them. They all have a big house, the nice car, the designer clothes, the expensive holidays. I paused. They're living the dream. And then there's me. Here. Helen stretched out her arm and offered me the wine bottle. I stepped forward and took it from her. Are they really millionaires? They really are. I took a slug of wine. I'm not kidding. Every one of them. Fern, remember Fern? She owns a chain of hotels, and Blair floated his company at the stock market before the crash and pocketed 50 million. He went from being rich to super rich overnight. If they're so rich, why don't they help you pay off your debts? They all got together and came to an agreement that wouldn't do that. They think I need to get my shit together, learn to help myself. She nodded slowly. Nice. My phone beeped. Your famous boyfriend? She asked sarcastically. I smiled. Amazon. Delivery tomorrow. What have you ordered? Shoes, I cry. She started to cry. It's a bit late, to be honest, I said. I wanted them for tonight. She cried harder. Hey. I moved closer. I have a boyfriend. I had a boyfriend, she sobbed. I had a fiancé. I had a home and then I went and fucked everything up. Helen, come down, I pleaded. Let's go somewhere, we can talk about it. She didn't answer. We stayed like that for a moment here, teetering on the edge of the wall and watching her in silence. I didn't want to blow it by saying the wrong thing. What happened to you, Hel? I asked her, so finally. You left school so suddenly. We moved, she murmured. To Shrewsbury. Shrewsbury? She sniffed. My dad got a new job. Just like that? I mean, you were at school on the Friday, and then you just weren't there on the Monday. I don't know. I didn't know it was my last day, she said. My parents didn't tell me until afterwards that I wasn't coming back. Was it because of... Did you tell him? I hesitated about... She shook her head, a sudden startled movement. No, but I was... But I was pretty messed up. I think they thought it would be a good idea for all of us to have a new start. I swallowed hard. I was pretty messed up too. Helen looked up at me, her face painted, strained, her eyes glazed over with tears. I tried to find you, I told her. Later, I mean online. She sniffled. I don't do social media. I don't blame you, I said. After everything. We fell silent. A breeze lifted the corner of her skirt, and she pushed it down, held it there. A pause. Then she wiped her eyes. Can I have one of your cigarettes? Sure, I said quickly, pulled the pack out of my bag and held it out to her. She reached for a pack. I can't quite... Can you move closer? Come down, I begged. Please help. Where did you live? Maybe we can share a cab home, or we could go and find a bar or something. We can catch up, talk about old times. I mean, just talk about anything you want. She considered this for a moment, and then, to my surprise, she turned, gripping the railing, and swung her legs over the wall and jumped down. I quickly moved next to her, positioning myself between her and the wall. I tapped out a cigarette, passed it to her, lit it from her, and then held out the wine bottle. She took it, breathed out a plume of smoke, took a slug of wine, and leaned back against the chimney top. So, it's really you? She looked at me sideways. T. McGee. She said this in a phony comedy voice, and her mouth curved into a smile. Jones, Helen Jones, I said in a James Bond voice. The one and only. She snorted and passed the wine bottle back to me, then put the cigarette to her lips, letting out another plume of smoke. We had some fun, didn't we? She said. I mean, before, we were badass. I agreed. Badass. Do you remember when you stole those ice lollies? You put them in your jean pocket, and then the shopkeeper stopped you and started questioning you, but you couldn't speak because my arse was so frigging cold. I threw my head back, laughing. I mean, fancy stealing ice lollies? It was hot, she protested, smiling. I wanted an ice lolly, and I wasn't wearing jeans, she corrected me. They were flimsy shorts, made of, like, next to nothing. My arse was completely frozen. It was torture. We laughed again, then fell silent. We were both thinking about her flimsy shorts, thinking about all the other things that happened that summer, how our friendship had frozen in time like those ice lollies, then melted away under the sun. He's married. Did you know that? She said. He has a wife and a daughter. He works for a bank in the city. He's some big shot there. I felt my gut searing. I saw that too. I mean, it was a while ago, but yeah, I looked him up. She started to cry again. Why do some people just breeze through life getting everything? Why do people have to fight so hard just to stay sane? Just to stay alive? Her sobs turned into huge, rattling gulps. God, why do I have to fuck everything up? She leaned into me, putting her head on my shoulder. So I put my arms around her and hugged her tight. Come on, I said into her hair. Let's call a cab in the morning. When you've had a good night's sleep, things will look different. I don't think so. You're drunk. Things always look better when... No! She shook her head. No, they don't. They won't. I've been kicked out of my apartment. I have to get out by the end of the week. What? Why? Because I lost my job and I couldn't pay the rent. Why did you lose your job? I had too much time off. She sniffled a snob. I was sick. You were sick? She nodded. Well, couldn't you just explain that? She hesitated. No, she said. So, what will you do? I asked. Where will you go? She shrugged her shoulders. I thought about this for a minute. Well, that's it then. It's settled. You're coming to stay with me. I can't ask that of you. Yes, I said firmly, excitedly. Yes, you can. She looked back at me for a moment to see if I meant it, and then a grin began to form on her face. Are you serious? I grinned back at her, deadly serious. Come home with me, and tonight, and then tomorrow we'll go and pick up all your stuff. Oh my God, Tate. She started to cry in her ears again. Oh my God, I would love that. Are you sure you have the room? I'll make room. I'll absolutely bloody make room. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe I found you again. She flung her arms around me. Tears sprang to my eyes, my own eyes too, as I hugged her. And I can't believe I found you, Hal. I thought I'd lost you forever. You're the best friend I ever had. I've missed you so much, T. I love you so much. I held her tight. I've missed you so much too, Hal. And I whispered into her hair. And I love you too. She pulled away from me and reached into her pocket for a tissue, then blew her nose hard, and we both burst out laughing at how loud it was. Whatever happens, Hal, I said, we'll make it better. I promise you. Chapter 22. Maddie closed her eyes. They felt grainy and her head ached. She was tired, but she wanted to get the edits she'd been working on finished before she started dinner. Getting early night, she rubbed her temples and looked back at her computer screen, but it was no good. The lines of words were blurring around the edges and moving on the page. The front door slammed. Hello? Dan called out cheerfully from the hallway. I'm here, she called back. Dan appeared in the doorway of the study and saw her blaring eyes. Still working? You look exhausted, Mads. I'm going to stop now. Maddie closed the document and switched off her monitor. Where's Emily? She's not home yet. Dan frowned and looked at his watch. It's gone 7. I know. Have you called her? She messaged me earlier and said she was going to Rosie's after school to do homework. I told her she needed to be back for dinner. I'll call her. Dan reached for his phone. Maddie followed him into the kitchen, unhooked an apron from the back of the door and slipped it over her head, tying it at the waist. She fetched onions and carrots from the refrigerator drawer, pushing them over the countertop towards her husband, who was standing at the breakfast bar, phone to one ear, shrugging off his jacket and loosening his tie. Straight to voicemail. He put his phone on the worktop and sat down, frozen, frowning. Maybe she's in a dead zone? The phrase sounded ominous. Maddie added, on her way home. Maybe. Maddie handed down a knife. For the carrots, she clarified, smiling, but she, too, was worrying, just a little now. Why don't you message Kay? Yeah, I'll do that. Maddie put a pan on the stove and filled the kettle to boil water for the spaghetti, then picked up her phone and opened the messaging app. She tapped out a message, then opened the fridge and took out a bottle of chilled white wine. Taking 2 glasses from the cupboard, she unscrewed the bottle and poured them a glass each. She placed one on the worktop in front of Dan. Her phone bleeped. She picked it up. What did she say? Emily's not there. She hasn't been there. Maddie looked up at Dan, feeling the same that she could see on his face. I'll get Kay to ask Rosie where she is. Maddie tapped out another message, then took a bunch of spaghetti out of the pocket, snapped it into 2 and dropped it into the pan. The answer came back a few minutes later. Sorry, Maddie. Rosie doesn't know. They went to the shops after school and then Rosie came home. She doesn't know, Maddie said to Dan. Dan pursed his lips. So she lied. Looks that way. Maddie tapped out a message to Emily. Where are you? But there was no reply. She made a margarina sauce and they sat down to dinner. As they ate, she told Dan about the vodka bottle. So, here we go again, he said, sighing. I suppose so. Maddie sighed too. They waited, watching the clock. At 10:45, the front door opened. Maddie's heart leaped with relief. She followed Dan out the hallway where Emily was standing, looking shamefaced, kicking off her shoes. I'm sorry, she said quickly. Where have you been? Dan demanded. I missed the bus. The bus from where? Maddie protested. You said you were going to Rosie's. I know, I'm sorry. Emily, it's nearly 11 o'clock. You didn't answer any of our calls or messages. You have lied to us. You weren't at Rosie's. I didn't lie. There was a change of plan. My phone was only on 2%, so I didn't want to use it up. And then it died. Where have you been? I met some of my friends at the park and we were talking and I lost track of time. Have you been drinking? No. Where did you get that? Where did you get vodka? Dan asked. Emily looked irritated. What are you on about? Your mum found an empty bottle of vodka in the waste paper bin in your bedroom. Oh, for God's sake, Emily said. That's been there for ages. It's not even mine. Then whose is it? No one's. Did you drink it? Dan pressed her. I can't remember. Some of it, maybe. It ended up in my bag, that's all, and so I put it in the bin. Right, that's it, Dan said. You're grounded. Dad, I told you, Emily wailed. It's been there for ages. It's nearly 11 o'clock. You're supposed to be home for dinner, and you didn't even have the consideration to let us know where you've been. I told you, my phone died. So, who are these friends you've been hanging around with? Dan said. I want to know their names. Here we go again. That's all you care about. Seriously. You never stop going on about it. It's your problem, not mine. If you don't like my friends, said Maddie. We don't know your friends. That's the problem. And of course we care. You're out with these people all the time, and you're out until late, and we have no idea who they are or where you are. You don't need to know. They're my friends, not yours. You can't stop me having friends just because you don't know their parents. You want to bet? Said Dan. Ah! Emily screamed. I hate you. Right, that's it. Give me your phone. Dad, no. Give it to me. Emily placed her phone into her father's hand, burst in tears, and ran upstairs. Dan looked at her phone, then walked back into the kitchen and put it on charge. He sat down on the worktop and put his head in his hands. What did we do? He asked. Where did we go wrong? We didn't. It's a phase. We'll get through it. But it's not getting any better. It's getting worse, Mads. We need to do something about it. What can we do? Asked Maddie. Except be there for her. There's nothing else we can do. Dan heaved a sigh, then looked across from his daughter's conference phone, which was lying on the glossy worktop. As they sat in silence, the phone powered into life, and a message flashed up. Dan pulled the phone towards him, peering at it. Maddie turned it a little so they both could see it. Please don't be mad at me, the message said. There was no contact name beside it, just a red heart. Dan and Maddie looked at each other. The phone lit up again, and another message flashed at the front of them. It's only because you are so amazing, so beautiful. Dan bristled in his seat, his back stiffening, his face clouding. He watched the phone, waiting for the next message, his eyes transfixed. But I can wait. Dan's head shot up. The little shit, he's trying to have sex with my daughter, he exclaimed. You don't know that, Maddie began. Maddie! He gave her a wake-up face. I can't. There's only one thing that can mean. Right, that's it. Dan leaped out of his seat and marched towards the door. Dan, stop! Maddie pleaded. Wait, this isn't going to work. She won't tell you anything. If you confront her like this, the mood she's in, she'll shut down even further. You want me to ignore it? What choice do we have, Dan? She's going to have boyfriends. She's 14, she's underage. But it's what happens, isn't it? Boys are going to try. So you condone this? No, Maddie sighed. Of course I don't. But this isn't the way to tackle it. When she's calmed down, I'll go upstairs. I'll remind her that boys will want to... She looked at her husband, widening eyes. To try, she said carefully. But that she doesn't have to let them. Let me handle it. She's not going to tell you anything if you go storming up there now, laying down the law. She might even go. The thought made Maddie's heart rate quicken. Maddie glared at Maddie for a moment, then his shoulders slouched in defeat. He walked back to the breakfast bar and sat down, fixing his tired, red-rimmed eyes on the phone. He watched it, waiting, but, to Maddie's immense relief, the owner of the red heart had taken Emily's silence as an answer. For now. Chapter 23. We didn't go straight home after the Pig and Whistle. We went for a drink somewhere in Soho. I can't remember where, exactly. We were pretty wasted by the time we left. I remember going down some steps into a bar that looked like a wine cellar, with exposed stone walls and wooden kegs for tables, and I remember ordering a cold bottle of rosé, which came in a silver ice bucket with glasses, the size of a small goldfish bowls. We sat on high stools at the bar. There were tea lights along the bar top. Helen was wearing a beautiful pair of diamond earrings, which were twinkling and shimmering in the flickering light. So yes, Helen existed. She exists. Her real name is Helen Mikosikwa. Her mother is English. Her father is Polish. We became friends at school in the autumn of year 8, when she was moved up to my set for English, and for a while we were inseparable. She was one of the prettiest, cleverest girls in our year group, and I was honoured that she singled me out. As it turned out, we had loads in common. We loved books and movies and plays, and she loved reading them aloud, as did I. We thought up for ideas for screenplays, and before long we were writing them. We assigned ourselves parts and performed them together on the crackled concrete site of an old disused-bombed shelter at the back of the school field. For 2 long hot summers we saw each other every day. During the second summer, when we were 14, we started shoplifting, and that's when we decided we needed fake names in case we get caught. Helen had done some research. She said we needed to keep our first names. It's what undercover cops do. You probably know that. It's in case someone they know calls out to them on the street. Hey Helen, hey T. I hated my Christian name, hated how unusual it was. Had already started telling people that my real name was Tina, and insisting everyone call me T. So, in our own fictional world, to anyone who knows us, she became Helen Jones, and I became T. McGee. Thankfully, we were never arrested, so we didn't need the fake names. We didn't even shoplift for long. In fact, I think the last time with the ice lilies might have been the very last time, because Helen so nearly got caught. We weren't that badass, really. We were just searching for a bit of drama. We lost our nerve some time after that, but the fake names stuck. They were our thing. They were part of the glue that held us together until we were pulled apart. But we didn't talk about that night in Soho wine cellar. I wanted to know what Helen had done, or thought she'd done, that was so terrible she'd contemplated jumping from the roof. She told me she didn't think that she'd really wanted to end her life, but both literally and metaphorically, she couldn't seem to stop herself from teetering off the rooftops, from living life close to the edge. Losing her job was just one more thing in a long line of things crap always found her, she said. When anything good came along, she didn't know what to do with it. She didn't know how to just be happy, to allow a bright future for herself. If there was no drama, then she would create it. She'd engineer fights with her fiancé, Matt. She'd push him away in ways that she hated herself for. And when he kept coming back, refusing to let her sabotage the relationship, she'd made sure she did the unforgivable. She decided to terminate her pregnancy. When she confessed, told Matt what she'd done, she'd known it would be the end of their relationship. As for the baby, she didn't know why she'd done what she'd done, except that her gran had died recently, and she'd become scared of the future. She now bitterly regretted the termination. It was the first thing she thought of when she woke up in the morning, and the last thing on her mind when she fell asleep at night. That, and Matt's accusing in silence. For 3 weeks he'd avoided her, slept on the sofa, eaten at work. Finally, she'd moved out of the beautiful home she'd shared with him and into a tiny, soulless studio flat. Then there was her job. She'd taken a lot of time off work due to the pregnancy sickness that she couldn't tell anyone about. So when she was hauled into the HR office, she couldn't give an explanation or a fit note. Her work had been below par, she said, in any event. She hadn't been able to focus. She was pinning for her grandmother. She missed Matt, she missed her baby, she felt the greatest of guilt about all of it. There was simply nothing good left for her in her life. She didn't know what had made her go to the school reunion that night. One last attempt to recapture something from her past life, maybe? Or the fact that she knew it had the roof terrace she could jump from. She wasn't entirely sure. But she told me later meeting me, she had made her feel as if there was still something out there, something left. My appearance on the roof terrace, my concern for her, and my offer a place to stay were enough to reignite whatever spark had been extinguished inside her. It had given her something to cling on to, she said. This, in turn, made me feel good. I was fortified by her presence. She's been my soulmate, and I've been bereft when I lost her. But here she is, back in my life again. Overwhelmingly, I wanted to fix the things for her. I know. Trying to fix someone who's broken is never the answer to your problems. Read any self-help book and it will tell you that this is not the path to redemption, that you have to begin and end with yourself. But in this case, nothing could have been truer. My past and Helen's were intertwined in a way I barely allowed myself to remember until now. And so, a spark was lit inside me too. But I'm jumping ahead. That night was about saving Helen. We went to the bar, and then she came back to my place, and I made us cheese on toast, and we made a plan for her to get out of her miserable studio flat and bring her things to mind that following day. And then she went to sleep on the fold-out bed behind the sofa in the living room, and I ate some more cheese on toast, and then I went to bed. So no one lost their life that weekend, or an earring. Helen still had both earrings. They are so pretty. They twinkle and shimmer every time they catch the light. Chapter 24. Maddie stood in line at the post office, feeling hot and uncomfortable. She'd woken with the now familiar black cloud forming above her eyes, and it was building, growing thicker, like a storm brewing in her head. She tugged off her sweat top and pulled her water bottle out of her bag and took a few sips. She needed to stay hydrated, but she knew what was coming. First the cloud, soon the storm, or worse, the hurricane. She needed a plan. If she walked up the supermarket on the corner, she could buy a few things for dinner and be back home in bed with her heated beanbag and her sleep headphones before her headache became unbearable. Emily wasn't due home from school for a few hours yet. She could sleep it off. It would be okay. She heaved a sigh at the prospect of yet another day wasted, but she'd feel a little better once she slept. She'd be more productive then, and besides, she knew there was no way when she was feeling like this that she was going to be able to look at a screen. Maddie reached the front of the queue, handed over a package, brought stamps, and then pushed open the glass door and post office into the street. As she walked down to the Tesco Express on the corner, her phone rang. She pulled it out of her pocket, took a long look at it, and as she did so, she felt a hard thwack against her right hand side of her body. Her bag fell from her shoulder. Her phone clattered onto the pavement, and she landed on the ground with a thud. It took her a moment to realize what had happened. She'd walked into a pole. No, not a pole. She walked into a bloody traffic light. She quickly pulled herself to her feet, embarrassed, holding up a hand to thank a couple who were now hurrying over to help. It's all right. She forced a smile and leaned down to pick up her phone and her bag. I'm not hurt. Are you sure? The woman asked her, looking doubtful. Honestly, thank you anyway. You're very kind, but I'm fine. So long as you're sure, said the woman. The man nodded his agreement, and they both carried on up the street. But Maddie wasn't fine. She wasn't even okay. She grazed her hand and her leg was throbbing. She was hurt and sore and in pain. She felt an unexpected surge of anger as she watched the couple walk away. The little shits. Not the couple. It was those bloody kids that Emily was hanging around with. they were the cause of all this. Last night, while Dan cleaned up the dinner things, Maddie had gone upstairs to talk to Emily. She had taken her up on some spaghetti and sauce and a peace offering, and they'd had the conversation, the one about the boyfriend. Emily climbed up, initially angry that she and Dan had been reading her messages. Maddie had explained that they had been married but hadn't meant to pry. "I'm not stupid, Mum," Emily told her. "I know I don't have to do anything. If you've read the messages, you should know that. But the next time, there won't be a next time. I'm not having sex, Mum." "Okay, but maybe we should talk about it." "What is there to talk about? You know, sex." "I don't need to talk about that." Emily had her scornfully. "We'll learn that stuff at school." "If there is anything you're worried about, you know you can talk to me, don't you?" "There's nothing to talk about. I'm not having sex, alright? Please, just leave me alone." Maddie had left it there. She felt reassured and had, in turn, reassured Dan, or tried to. She had known that he still wasn't happy, but Emily was her own person, she pointed out. She'd never allow herself to be pressured into anything. She'd be more likely to tell the guy to fuck off. And that's what had happened, hadn't it? By the looks of things. Dan had reluctantly accepted this, but as Maddie was brushing her teeth, finally about to go to bed, Kay had messaged Maddie to say that Rosie had let slip that another group had a whip. "It's a modern-day slang for wheels," Kay had explained. She'd followed it with a second message to say that Rosie had insisted that the friend with the car was someone on the fringes of the group. Nothing for her parents to be concerned about. But Kay was concerned, and Maddie was too, although for Kay's benefit, she'd pretended not to be. Out of two of them, it was definitely more likely to be Emily leading Rosie astray, and Maddie often felt a weight of silent accusations. She didn't want the fuel in with her anxiety, but it was easier for Kay. Rosie was more compliant, more likely to listen to her parents, and not to be down on Rosie. She was plainer and bigger. Emily was, by anyone's standard, beautiful. She was charismatic, independent-minded, and well, more mature-looking than Rosie. Maddie felt mean for thinking it, but there was less likelihood of Rosie having the same draw from the opposite sex. Of course, it didn't mean that her car owner was giving the girls lifts anywhere, nor, of course, did it mean that he was suspected behind the red heart. But if he was old enough to drive, then he had been at least 17 and too old to be hanging around with these pair of 14-year-old girls. Maddie sighed. She wouldn't tell Dan, not yet, but she'd known the instant she read Kay's message that this was going to be yet another sleepless night. Like most nights, she had initially fallen into a deep sleep with the help of some headache tablets, but she'd woken again an hour or two later with the feeling that something was wrong. Had she heard the front door open? She knew it was unlikely, but since that last time Emily had stayed out all night, she couldn't take it for granted that her daughter was still safely tucked up in bed. Even though it had only happened that for once, it was as though she couldn't move on from it. She couldn't get the what if out of her head. So, last night, as most nights, her mind had swum up out of her drowsy bed and nudged into wakefulness. She'd pushed back the covers and padded down the landing, hyperventilate, alert now the way she'd been when Emily was a baby, with bronchitis or croak. She gently turned the handle and crept into her daughter's room, her eyes searching the darkness for the body-shaped lamp on the duvet. She'd listened to the sound of her daughter's breathing until she was certain, and then, only then, could she go back to sleep. She had to do this, she had to endure it, she had to go through the pathetic routine night after night, because experience had taught her that if she didn't, she'd just lie awake anyway, torturing herself. She would run through all the possibilities, and really, they were endless. Emily had got to call and sneaked out. Dan got up for water and put a chain on. Emily had tried to get back in. Neither she nor Dan had heard her, or worse, Emily was out getting drunk somewhere. She was in trouble, and now she was a passenger in a car, and the driver had been drinking. There had been an accident. There was about to be a knock on the door from the police, and so it went on. Every new prospect was increasingly alarming, increasingly unbearable, and Maddie couldn't even comfort herself with the thought that she was being ridiculous, that this was just her imagination going wild, because these things happened, didn't they? They happened to people, and they happened to children. They happened every day to other parents, so why not her? She sighed now and looked down at her phone. It seemed okay. Not broken anyway, thankfully. She pushed it into her pocket, took out a tissue, and cleaned the skin off her heel. Broken skin on the heel of her hand, removing a small piece of grit. Meanwhile, gritting her teeth, she thought about for a moment. Grit and determination. Better. I could use that, she realised. I'd have to play with it, but a small glimmer of hope rose inside her, as it always did when she thought about the book she wanted to write, the book that was always close to finding the time for. It wouldn't be long. This too shall pass. And then she would write a deep, heartful story about the joy and the pain of motherhood. She'd have a ton of material. Ha! Write what you know, they say, and she knew all right. So, none of this was wasted, was it? Not one single experience or emotion? This difficult time of her life would be over, and some good would come out of it, and other parents would find a comfort and inspiration in her words. Everybody knew that parenting a teenager wasn't easy, and they'd say that they too could get better at it, because this is just a phrase, right? But what if it wasn't? Maddie drew a long, shaky breath as she picked up her bag and walked carefully, cautiously onto the street. It had been going on for a few months now, on and off, the overstepping of boundaries, the staying out late, and now Emily had a boyfriend she couldn't even talk to her mum about. Maddie felt hurt by this. She had been so close to her own mother, had shared everything. Was she herself that unapproachable? Or was there a very good reason why Emily didn't want her parents to meet these new friends? What if she was brainwashed? She'd read books, seen documentaries, read articles and stories about teenagers who'd been lost to cults and suicide pacts, or worse. She couldn't actually imagine what would be worse than losing her daughter, but it would come to her at 3 a.m, she'd know. Maddie knew that anything was possible when you had a child. Your worst fears could so easily become reality. She saw it on the news all the time. Those parents who appeared on TV, poor, brave, heartbroken men and women who'd gone public to warn all the other parents, be careful, stay alert, stay awake. So, last night she stayed awake longer, opened the door wider, moved closer. Her daughter always slept so soundly, so silently, submerged under the sheets, stiff and still, like an Egyptian mummy. She always slept that way, often not moving for hours. When she was younger, Maddie used to worry that she'd died in her sleep. She didn't worry about that anymore. Her worries had mutated. Her daughter dying in her sleep was somehow much less frightening than all the other dangers that could befall her. Maddie knew each time her daughter stepped outside the front door that this could be it, the last time she didn't come back home again. Now, she picked up a basket near the entrance of the supermarket, then moved around the shop, selecting olives, cheese, fish, vegetables, avocados, nuts. She yawned out loud as she stood in the line of the checkout, then glanced around, embarrassed to see if anyone had overheard. The man in the queue behind her was smiling. Normally she was quite friendly and would have smiled back. Would probably have got chatting. It was the writer in her. She liked people, liked finding out new things, swapping stories. But she didn't seem to feel like that lately. Everyone was annoying her. She walked away, down at her basket instead. A moment later, she reached the checkout and began to pile her goods out onto the counter. She selected some nice, healthy food, but food wasn't the only thing that mattered, was it? What did the book say? the one that they'd just published at work, the one about sleep. The message was clear. A good 7 to 8 hours of sleep was just as important for your health as your diet. It was crucial, in fact. It was when your body repaired itself, when cells regenerated, when memories formed. No wonder she was forgetting things lately. And the stress, well, that wasn't good either, was it? It was so bad for her body. What was the point of eating well and making sure she got enough exercise if she was going to spend half the night lying awake worrying about Emily? The cloud over her eyes thickened as she held out the store loyalty card for a guy at the checkout. She paid for the food and walked home. As she walked up the path and into the house, her phone rang. She realised then that she had completely forgotten someone had been trying to call. She pulled it out and saw there had been several missed calls, all from Dan. She pushed the slider across. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice agitated. "I've been trying to call you." "I'm sorry," she said. "I fell over and hurt my arm, and then—" "You fell over? Where? What happened?" "It's nothing. I just slipped." "Where?" "Union Road, near Tesco, in the street." "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just tired. I've got a bad head again. It's made me a bit foggy." A pause. "Right," he says decisively. "I'm on my way home. Don't be daft, Dan. You can't just leave the office in the middle of the day. I told you I'm okay. I just need to go back to bed for a bit." "Wait, just wait, can you? I'm on my way. I'll be half an hour tops." "Why? What's going on?" There was a brief moment of silence, and then, "I'm sorry, Mads. You're not going to like this," he said. Chapter 25. I woke up early, but as there was no sound from the living room, I stayed in bed for a while. When I got up, Helen was still asleep, so I tiptoed about, made tea and toast, and got back into bed again. I was still tired, and I had a bit of a headache from all the wine we'd drunk the night before. I was feeling positive and excited. My flat was small, and it would be a squeeze, but the thought of having Helen living here with me was really lifting my spirits. I'd been on my own for too long. When Helen woke, we took a walk through Hyde Park, along the Serpentine. The morning was warm, and the sun already high in the sky. She told me that she was feeling a little better and was ready to collect a few things. We drove in my Corsa the short distance back to her flat near Baker Street, where I left her for a bit. We agreed that she'd call me again when she had a bath and finished packing. It would be around 6, she said. I'd go and collect her as soon as she was ready. In the meantime, I'd go out for groceries, I suggested. I'd cook a nice meal. "Don't go to any trouble," she said. "It's no trouble," I told her. "I'm happy to." In the end, we settled on a take-out and some hair of a dog, a bottle of rosé from the supermarket next to the Chinese takeaway at the end of my road. I offered to help her put her furniture into the storage the next day, but she said she didn't have any. Most of her larger belongings were her fiance's, and she said that they could stay there. She said that what she didn't need, or I didn't have room for, could go in a box for a charity shop. When I got home, I cleaned the bathroom, washed the dishes, hoovered the flats, and emptied the bins. I pulled out Helen's bed, rearranging its positions a few times, fed George, and sat back down on the sofa to wait. It was only 4 o'clock. I contemplated answering a few emails, sending off my CV for a few acting jobs, but I was feeling a little weary and a bit hungover. I looked around for my phone, then realised it must have still been in my bag, so I walked into the hallway and picked it up from the floor. I'd dropped it and rooted around it. My hand touched something hard, cold, metal. I pulled it out. It was a can of Fanta that Helen had brought me on the way of the park earlier that morning. One for each of us, along with a pack of fruit pastels from a newsagent on the Edgware Road. As I groped around in the inside pocket of my bag for my phone, I also found a half-eaten pack of sweets. She must have stuffed them there as we sat on the beach by the lake. I smiled to myself. It was so Helen, such a familiar gesture. When we were younger, I'd often found her half-finished packs of food and cans of drink in my bag, and she had such a sweet tooth. We both had back then, like typical teenagers. We were addicted to sweets and fizzy drinks. Nowadays, I tried not to eat sugary foods because, unlike Helen, who was still whipped thin, I had to think of the calories. I hadn't had a can of Fanta or a few paddles for years, but maybe the sugar would pick me up a little. I walked into the living room, placed my phone and sweets on the table, and then sat back on the sofa and pulled back the ring pull with a satisfying fizz and a tiny snap. Next, I tore a sugar-coated fruit pastel out of the silvery plate paper and popped it into my mouth, which was instantly flooded with flavour. Orange, no lime, that sweet and sour, tangy taste. It was so weird. It was taking me right back to the hot, heady days when Helen and I had hung out together drinking pop and eating sweets in the arcade at the shop near the lanes. Or that second summer, sitting in the creaky old swings at the park we'd call the Wreck. He's married. He has a wife and a daughter. Helen's words came from nowhere. My heart beat faster. He works for a bank in the city. He's some big shot there. I slowly placed the can on the coffee table. We talked about him more. I was sure of it, but we'd drunk a lot of wine and I couldn't quite remember everything that had been said. I reached out, pulling my laptop towards me. I look him up just once a few years ago, but I had to close down the web page soon after I'd found him because the thought of him continuing to exist, having an actual life, a good life, was making me feel physically sick. I felt just as sick now, as I opened the browser and tapped in his name. Up came the page of results. The words cooperative banking, individual banking, wealth management leaped out at me before my eyes moved, and there he was, smiling back at me. No room for doubt, that was him. Even though I hadn't seen his face for nearly 25 years, it was as familiar to me as if it was yesterday. It was handsome and as heartbreaking and as sickening as I remember. It was everything I was afraid of and everything I tried to forget. I clicked on the arrow and across the series of images, smiling, warm, glowing images, with a group of colleagues stepping up onto the podium to receive an award. Shaking hands in a suit and tie, clutching a pink box bottle of Laurent Pierre. He must have been in his late 40s now, but he changed very little. He was still stunningly good looking, with all full head of thick fair hair and some disarming smile. And then, as I scrolled, I came across a family shot, his arms around a woman, a beautiful woman, the other around a teenage girl. He was happy. He had a happy life. The anchor rose within me like a ball. I pushed the laptop away from me onto the sofa and I ran to the bathroom and threw up into the toilet I'd just bleached. Afterwards, I leaned back against the bath and closed my eyes. The bath was cold and the floor was hard, but I didn't have the strength to move. So I curled up in a ball mat and, with my eyes closed, I remembered. I remembered how it happened, how it started. That very first day he'd walked into the Wreck. There had been a few of us there. Helen and I were on the swings with the boys. Sid, Cole, Tommy Doherty, Tony Latch were sat on the grass by the roundabout with their bikes. But it was the summer holidays and we were bored. I remember the hot sun beating down on us as he came through the gate and sauntered over. Said he was looking for a missing dog or something, and then ended up staying to chat. He lit a cigarette and Sid had asked if he could have one, and he'd smiled that smile of his and flipped Sid the pack. He asked us what we were doing. Tommy told him that they planned to cycle us to the waste ground behind the old depot, but that had a puncture. And so he'd lowered himself into the haunches, cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and being pumped up, and he'd pumped up the tyre. Got Tommy to take the bike for a spin around the Wreck. He then told Tommy that it was no good, that he would need a puncture kit. He had one, though. He had some kind of garage or lock-up near the depot. Said he'd help Tommy fix it if he liked. Take them all up there, drop them up at the waste ground afterwards. He said his van was parked up just outside the Wreck, and that he could put their bikes in the back. The boys had looked at each other in silence, their eyes looking. He shrugged. He was going that way anyway. Take it or leave it, he told them. It was up to them. He started to walk. The boys quickly clambered to their feet and asked him to wait, and then as they pushed their bikes towards him, he turned, looked up at me and Helen, and asked if we wanted to come along. Helen jumped off the swing. My parents would kill me, going off with a stranger and in his van like this, but I didn't want to look like a loser. Everyone was going. He would look if I said no. And besides, the thrill of doing something grown up, something extraordinary, something different was irresistible. So what if I didn't know the guy? There were 5 of us and only one of him. Although they were only 15, Tommy and Sid were both over 6 foot tall. Tony was stocky, he played rugby. They weren't weaklings. And anyway, this man seemed completely normal. It would be fine and my parents didn't need to know. So I followed Helen across the wreck. The boys had looked put out then, clearly wanting it to be an boys only outing, but they didn't say much except to nudge each other and tell each other in hushed tones to act cool as they pushed their bikes out of the park gates and lifted them into this van. Tommy and Sid sat up front with him, and the rest of us climbed into the back with the bikes. Not strictly legal, he told us, so keep your heads down. But that just made it even more of an adventure. The thrill of doing something we shouldn't was a draw like no other. On the way, he stopped at the garage and brought a load of crisps, cans of Fanta and Coke, and a whole stash of sweets, crisps, chocolate bars and cakes. There was enough for everyone and had plenty to share. He put the bag in the middle and told us to help ourselves. And then we had the best time ever, eating and drinking, sitting in the sunshine outside his loft, splashing each other with the hose he used to clean his van, and riding bikes up and down and doing wheelies. We stayed there all afternoon. It had been a long, boring summer, and we'd had nothing to do but go to the spa and sit on the wall outside and biker, or go to the wreck and sit on the swings and biker there instead. But here was something different. Someone different. Someone to look up to. He taught Sid and Tommy how to fix a puncture. He then showed them how to find their way around a car engine. He had an amazing music collection and told us to find some tracks to play while they worked. So Helen and I sat up in the front of the van, drinking Fanta and playing music off his sound system, choosing our favourite tracks with pride, as if we were DJs. When we played a song everyone loved and got thumbs up or a steady nod of the head in time with the music, we enjoyed the feeling that gave us. We cranked up the volume and blared it out. I've never sat in front of a van before. I'd never sat in a vehicle that didn't also have my own or somebody else's parents in it. I'd never sat so high up. We felt so grown up, so cool, sitting there in front of the seats on our own like that. At one point, he asked me to slide across the driver's seat, turn the key in the ignition and switch on the engine. When I put my foot on the pedal and revved the car engine as it crested, he looked up from behind the bonnet and winked at me, and I felt myself light up like a sun. We sat there all afternoon, eating and drinking, high on sugar and sunshine, occasionally tooting the horn, enjoyed how that made him look up and laugh. I watched his fair hair as it moved around underneath the bonnet, and my heart began to ache in this strange alien way. He was so handsome, so commanding. He made the boys look like boys, stupid boys, which they were, of course, falling all over him like a bunch of idiots, trying to be like him, trying to look cool. But I secretly understood it. The attention he gave us, all of us, was intoxicating. He was like no one I'd ever known. Later, as the sun went down, he said the boys could leave their bikes in the lock-up if they wanted and come back for them tomorrow. That he would give us a lift home. Everyone got in, but we didn't go anywhere for a while. There was a mattress in the back, and the boys stretched out on it, and he got out a bottle of vodka and passed it around, and we all just lay back and chilled and listened to music, and the boys smoked, and we drank, and we all just hung out in his van. It was a magical afternoon and a magical evening. He had money and transport, and in that lay freedom for all of us. He had alcohol as well, which tasted rubbish at first, but when I mixed it with Fanta or Coke, it wasn't so bad. And the feeling I got from it was like no other. All my insecurities, all my arguments with my parents, the envy I felt towards my siblings. The warm glow from the vodka just wiped it all away. It made me feel confident. It made the music sound so amazing. It made us all laugh and laugh. It was warm and it was heady, and it was such good fun. The boys went back to their bikes the next day, but Helen and I weren't invited. Instead, we went to the wreck, hoping he'd come back. A few days later, when the boys were there, he came for us again, and we all went out. And before long, it became a regular thing. We didn't do much. He just picked us all up, and we hung out at the lockup, or went for the drives, drank vodka, and smoked. We listened to music, and we sang. He had a great voice. He could really sing, really sing. He sang lead vocals in a band, he told us. He promised to take us all to his next gig. He was funny and clever and so handsome, and I fell for him. Hook, line, and a sinker. He was my first true love, and the feelings was the most intense I've ever known. But Helen liked him too, and she was way prettier than me. He soon made it clear that he liked her back. Before too long, she was sitting up at the front with him, and they were talking in hushed tones together, and he was putting his arm round her and his hand on her knee and making sure that she was the very last one to be driven home. I was eating up inside with jealousy. It was torture watching them together. Being dropped off at the end of our road and having to get out the van and leave them alone, I felt pathetic in a way. But I kept going out with them because I loved him, and I had to see him. I had to be with him, even though it was Helen he wanted, not me. And then a miracle happened. One day he dumped Helen for me. All of a sudden he was done with her, and it was me he wanted instead. He had been with the wrong girl all along, he told me, and he only just realised. I was delirious with happiness. For the first time in my life I felt noticed, so Helen was hurt and jealous. What could I do? He didn't want her, he wanted me. I'd never known happiness like it, and there was no way I was going to give it up. Besides, Helen was so pretty, she'd soon find someone else. I spent ample time watching from the sidelines while boys found all over her. I deserved this. She needed to get over herself. So, for a blissful few weeks, while Helen sulked in the back of the van, I sat up front next to him, and he showered with attention. I enjoyed the elevated status and that this, in turn, gave me within the group. But when I was finally alone with him, when he put his arms around me and kissed me, it was all I'd ever wanted. Oh, so I told myself. In truth, it was kind of the attention that scared me a little. And when we dropped everyone else off, and when we started to take longer to get back to my street, when one evening we pulled up in a quiet dark road, I was afraid. I so badly wanted to kiss him. I so badly wanted him to kiss me, and when he did, I was in seventh heaven. But when his hands wandered up my t-shirt, I didn't feel like it. I flinched and asked him to stop. I wasn't ready for this, I told him. That was fine, he smiled, the first time, and the next. But the time after, he stroked my back and felt my bra coming off, and before I could say anything, he was lifting my shirt and up and over my head. I froze. I whimpered. I begged him to stop. Just a cuddle, he said. A kiss and a cuddle with our tops off, under the blanket, on the mattress, in the back of his van. But he wanted more than that, of course, and after a while I could see he was getting frustrated that I was going to lose him. I was desperate, so desperate to keep him, that I eventually did what he wanted. What happened? Finally, it was cold and clinical. It was not what I had expected, and it hurt in more ways than one. And then it was over for me, too. Just like it had been for Helen. Just like that, he stopped coming to the wreck. And when I walked my broken heart the 5 miles to lock up one Sunday to find him, there was no mistaking the coldness in his voice, the look of disdain in his eyes as he told me I shouldn't have come. It was over. All that was left was the hurt and the guilt and the shame. The boys were angry with us when he stopped coming for us. They called us a pair of slappers and told us we'd ruin their fun. And then the rumours started. At the wreck, in school, everywhere we went, at school, as word got round, the girls sniggered behind their hands, or stopped talking when we entered the classrooms, while the boys made a play for us, tried it on with us both, and Helen let them. That's where it took her from that point on. This is what I remembered on the cold bathroom floor as I waited for Helen. I remembered it all as I lay there with my heart pounding so hard I thought it would beat its way right out of my chest. But what I was remembering now wasn't the versions the kids at school had told us all these years ago. The version that I told myself, the version that had lived on silently inside me, the one where Helen and I were dirty and loose and undesirable and to blame. The version I was remembering was a true one, the one that made me want to punch a hole in the bathroom door, the one that made me want to find him and yank every thick blonde hair out of his smug, smiling head. It made me want to pick up a knife and thrust it into him, and to twist it with all my might into the cold cavity of his chest, where his heart should have been. Chapter 26. Maddie sat on the breakfast bar in the kitchen, swiping through the screenshots Dan had taken on the messages of Emily's phone. When she reached the end, she felt dizzy. She got up from her stool, walked across the kitchen to the chair by the window and lowered herself into it. Dan followed and crouched down in front of her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Maddie looked up anxiously. "You hacked her phone." "I didn't hack it. I intercepted a few messages, that's all." "She's not going to be happy. I promised her we wouldn't." "Mads," he objected, "does it matter? Our 14-year-old daughter being groomed by a bloody paedophile?" Maddie winced. "You don't know that, Dan." "I do," he said definitely, standing up. "I bloody well do know that." "We don't know how old he is." "Mads, wise up," he said angrily. "Those messages, it's pretty fucking obvious that he's not a fucking pupil at St. Mary's." Maddie knew this had to be true. Apart from anything else, if this person were a pupil at Emily's school, she would have been able to warn him that her parents had taken her phone. He wouldn't continue to send messages declaring his love for her, pleading with her to reply. "I know," she agreed, but if he's, 17 or something, would the police consider him to be a paedophile?" 17? Dan frowned at her. "You think he's 17? Or you know he's 17? "I don't know anything about him," Maddie said, closing her eyes. "I just know that—" She stopped and corrected herself. "I just knew that one of their group had a car." Dan's features hardened. "When did you find that out?" "Rosie slipped to Kay last night." "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I was going to, but you grounded Emily anyway by then." "I wanted to talk to her first." "So, what else did Kay say?" "Just that one of their friend groups had a whip. It means wheels," she added, seeing Dan's expression. "And the way Rosie was talking, it was, well, it was just like it was someone on the puberty of their group. I don't know why, but I figured he was still a teenager." "But it's older than that, Mads. It's obvious." Dan picked up his phone from the countertop and scrolled through the screenshots, reading out loud. "Don't be mad at me, please, Em. You're all I think about. When you're 16, we'll be together. We'll go somewhere where no one knows us." Think about it, Mads. Why would they have to go somewhere where no one knows us? Maddie didn't need to think about it. This was the message that scared her the most. Was Emily really planning to run away from home? "We'll go somewhere where no one knows us." Of course, this could be a romantic fantasy of a besotted teenage boy, but it could equally be a devious scheme of a fully grown man. "I'm telling you, Mads, that's no 17-year-old talking." His face suddenly crumpled up. He looked as if he was about to cry. Maddie got up from her chair, and reached out to comfort him. "She said then that they weren't—" she began tentatively. "I believe her, Dan." "Mads," he said, a sob catching his throat, "we can't trust her." "I'll talk to her," Maddie said. "You've already talked to her. She had the chance to tell you the truth, and she chose not to." I'll tell her that what she's doing is illegal. She may not realize that what he's asking is wrong. She's 14. She's not stupid. But she's immature. She may act tough, streetwise, like she knows everything, but really, she's still a child." "Exactly. And he's an adult." Dan rubbed his eyes. "Why else would she want to keep him a secret? Why else would she save him in their contacts like that, with no name, not even an initial? Just a single red heart." Maddie looked through the patio doors into the garden, where a pair of pigeons were cooing and necking on the pergola above the garden furniture. If she and Dan didn't go out and chase them away, there would be a bird shit all over her lovely cushions. But it seemed trivial in this context that shit would wash off. This wouldn't. This was not going to go away. What would we do? Do we call the police? She asked. That won't do anything. The texts aren't good enough to prove anything. They might talk to Emily, but she'll lie, and then she'll warn him. We need to find out more. Dan had clearly thought this through. We need to find out who it is. How? He eyed her carefully. You could call him, Mads, he said. Withhold your number, or call him from another phone. And say what? He protested. Just tell him some kind of bullshit. You're good at that. Good at lying, she said. Pretending, coming up with ideas. It's the writer in you. For a moment Maddie felt flattered that he was taking her writing ambition seriously. What would I say? I don't know, pretend to be from the tax office or something. You only need to find one thing about him. That's all we need, Mads. Something to go on, just a clue. Maddie thought about this. What if it's not a real phone number? What if it's like a burner or something? A burner? You know. Maddie inhaled deeply. She knew this would upset her, but a phone that he uses just for her. Dan looked angry for a second, and then he nodded and sat down the bar stool. And then we really would tip him off. He fell silent. Maddie stroked his back, then moved into the kitchen to switch on the kettle. The pounding that had started at the top of her head was grinding its way into her temples. She desperately needed to go upstairs and lie down. The sound of the front door opening made them both jump. Dan reached out and switched off the phone, and Emily walked into the kitchen. Maddie swung around and looked across the room at her daughter, seeing her objectively, the way a man might see her. Long legs under a short, pleated skirt, knee-high socks, black skull blazer, and a burgundy tie. She looked at her daughter's beautiful long fair hair and her full lips and imagined not seeing her again. She tried her hardest not to cry. Emily saw this and swallowed. I'm sorry, she said. What are you sorry for? Dan asked her, rising from her seat. For being a twat. Dan and Maddie looked at each other. And for going off on one. I'm really sorry. Okay, Maddie said, it's okay. So, can I have my phone back? Maddie sighed. We need to talk to you, she said abruptly. Dan shot her a warning look. Maddie gazed back at him helplessly, took a breath, then nodded. They'd run out of options. What else could they do? Some more messages came up, Em, said Maddie, noticing the change in her daughter's expression. And before you say anything, we looked at them because we had to. We're your parents. We've got every reason to be worried. Worried? Said Emily sharply. What about this person you're seeing? Maddie began. The one sending you messages. We have a reason to believe. How old is he? Dan jumped in. Emily looked caught out. Why are you asking me that? How old is he? Dan repeated. What's Rosie said? Emily demanded angrily. That he's old enough to drive, Maddie told her, although this wasn't strictly what Rosie had said. But it was enough to call their daughter's bluff. A flush crept up Emily's neck. Okay, so he's a little bit older than me, she admitted. How old? Dan pressed her. I don't know. Dan looked at Maddie and shook his head cynically. You don't know how old he is? Maddie frowned. He didn't say. What are you talking about, Em? Maddie asked. Do you think he's older than 20? Emily looked uncomfortable. No, she shrugged. I think he's, 18. Dan stepped closer to her. Who is he? He demanded. Just a friend of a friend. What friend of what friend? Brody, she said. He's his cousin. Who the hell was Brody? For God's sake, Dad. Emily flung her arms up in the air. He's just a friend, and it doesn't matter anyway, because it's over. We had an argument, and it's over, so it's irrelevant. I'm not going to see him again. Dan looked disbelieving. So why is he still sending you messages? I don't know, do I? Ask him. Dan nodded, picked up the phone, as if about to call her. Call the number. No, Emily screamed out, reaching for the phone. Don't you dare. Why not? Because you'll shame me, that's why. If you call him, he'll think I care. He'll think I want to get back with him. Okay, said Dad's not going to call him, right, Dan? She looked up at him, placing her hands on the worktop to steady herself. The headache had become unbearable. Dan said, I think we should call the police. What? You've got to be kidding me. You're 14. You're underage, Em. It's illegal. Nothing's happened. Emily's voice was shrill. He hasn't done anything. Are you sure about that? If you call the police, I'll swear I'll walk out of here and I'll never come back. Emily lowered her voice, as if in a sinister warning for them both. I mean it. If you call the police, you'll never see me again. Maddie wanted to plead with her daughter, to reassure her, but as she opened her mouth to speak, she felt herself sliding as the worktop fell apart out of her grasp. There was a heavy, painful thud against her shoulder, and everything went black. When she came to, she was on the floor near the breakfast bar, a cushion under her head. Emily was kneeling beside her, sobbing. Mum, she cried, seeing Maddie's opening eye. Mum, I'm sorry, please be okay. I'm okay, love, she murmured. I just fainted. Emily wiped her eyes and looked over to her father, who was hovering nearby on the phone. Dad, she called to him. When he saw Maddie's eyes were open, Dad dropped down beside her. Mads, can you hear me? Don't worry, love. I'm calling an ambulance. You don't need to do that, Maddie told him. I just fainted. I don't need an ambulance. I'm sorry, Em was saying over and over. I'll end it with him, properly, I promise, Mum. I'll show you. Dad, give me the phone. Not now, Dan said. Give your mum a chance to... He stopped, apologised to the call handler, and ended the call. He stroked Maddie's hair away from her face. Well, I can prove it to you. Emily was arguing. Give me the phone and I'll show you. Maddie nodded at her husband and said, give her the phone. Dan looked uncertain, but got up, fetched the phone, and handed it to Emily. He helped Maddie up and walked over to the chair by the window. There, Emily had triumphantly, tapping a message and holding it up to the screen. Look, I've told him. She pushed the phone up close. It's over, said her message. I don't want to see you anymore. Don't contact me again. And send. Emily tapped the arrow next to the message and showed her parents the double tick that showed it had been delivered. It's over, Mum. You don't need to worry anymore. I promise you, I'll never see him again. Chapter 27. By 6:30, Helen had unpacked and was having a bath. I went out for the food and wine. When I got back, Helen was out of the bathroom. I opened one of the bottles of wine I bought from the supermarket next to the Chinese takeaway, poured 2 glasses, then dished up the food. Chicken chow mein for her, and kung pao prawns and egg fried rice for me. Cheers, I said, raising my glass to her as we sat opposite each other, either side of a tiny table in the corner of my living room. It wasn't quite the ambience of Soho wine cellar, but I'd cleared the table of it as its usual clutter and lit 2 tall, slim red candles. In the half-light, Helen's features looked pale, almost ghostlish, behind the strands of white hair framing her narrow face. To us, she said, to finding each other again. Yeah, I smiled. I'm so glad I went to the reunion. I so nearly didn't. Me neither. And, I said gently, I'm so glad I came up to the roof terrace when I did. Must be fate, she smiled. That and fact, I smiled back, and shame. God, I bet Annabelle Mercer was glad she went. She'd had loved every minute. I can't believe what an idiot I made myself. Forget it, Helen said, gathering up a forkful of noodles. They always were such nasty little bitches. They've a lot to answer for, I said. She heaved a long sigh. I guess we gave them a lot to talk about. I caught her eye and shook her head. No, we didn't. Well, I did then. No, I said again. That's not what I meant. I meant that it wasn't our fault. We didn't do anything wrong, either of us. I paused. Except that I betrayed you, I said sadly. You didn't betray me. I look her in the eye. Well, I wasn't a very good friend, was I, after what he did to you? She put her fork down, reached out, and took my hand across the table. T, don't beat yourself up about that. You were 14, you didn't know. And besides, I went with him when I knew you liked him too, didn't I? I just thought he'd dump you. I know, she said, soothing me. I know what you thought. It's okay, T. So that wasn't why you stopped being friends? No, she insisted. The bullying was part of the reason I left school, but never you. I wanted to say goodbye to you, but my dad had to start his new job sooner than expected, and we just left. It happened very suddenly, and my parents didn't warn me, but I promise it wasn't anything to do with you. I swallowed, shamefaced. I thought he was going to be my boyfriend. Helen's face softened. I know you did, T. I thought the same. He tricked us both. When you're 16, we'll be together, is what he said. Is what he told you. She nodded. I shook my head. I was so blind. I thought it was love. Me too. He was so handsome. He was so charming. And when he looked at you, it was as if the whole world had melted away, and there was no one else except you. And then afterwards, I said, the anger rising inside me, he wouldn't even look at you, right? Just drive you home and told you to get out of the van. She nodded again. And that's all he was after, I said. From either of us, that's all he came for. She looked back at me in silence. And we blamed ourselves, I continued. We thought it was something we'd done. I thought I wasn't good enough for him, she confessed. I thought he'd lost interest because I wasn't, enough. Enough? In the sack. It all suddenly clicked. Is that why you felt you had to have sex with other men? I guess. I thought about this. I just thought it was because I was boring, I told her, and unattractive. I just thought he'd woken up to reality, and that he'd finally realised I wasn't anything special after all. You were beautiful, T, she said. You were lovely. I wasn't beautiful, I corrected her. You were beautiful. Whatever good points I had, I didn't see them, especially not after that. She put down her glass, and we were silent for a moment. But it wasn't about us, was it? I said. You were beautiful, he still did it to you. And it's taken me all this time to realise that he did the exact same thing to you. I shook my head again. I should have realised. I should have stuck by you. Instead, I let him divide us. If only I'd stuck by you, listened to you, when you tried to warn me about him. We could have done something, couldn't we? Like what? She frowned. Gone to the police? And said what? That he was a child abuser, Helen. She flinched. I know we were underage, she said, but he didn't make us do it, did he? He exploited us. He set out to have sex with us, both of us. In turn, one by one, he groomed us. Groomed? That's online, isn't it? Not necessarily. She stared back at me in silence. Don't you see? I persisted. He never cared about the boys, about helping them with their bikes and stuff. They were just his way in. His way of normalising what he was about to do. His way of gaining our trust. If he walked up to us in the park and asked if we wanted to get in his van with him and go for a ride, we would call him a pervert and told him to fuck off. But grooming, Helen said, frowning, that wasn't even a thing back then, was it? No, I agreed. It was just what blokes did. They tried it on. And we, I added, my heart flipping with the anger and the pain, we were just the dirty little slags that let him. Helen winced. Except that we weren't, I continued, my heart beating against my ribcage, because we were children, and he was an adult, and because he tricked us and he used us. We didn't know what he was doing, but now we do, and it's called grooming. I picked up my phone, tapped a web page, and held it up to her. Grooming is befriending and gaining the trust of a vulnerable person so that you can exploit them for sex. But, she said, thinking it through, was it really? I mean, he seemed genuinely interested, At first he did anyway. It's a common way in, I explained. That's what it says here. For romantic interests. It's what they do. It's what he did. We would never have had sex with him if he'd known that's all he wanted, right? No, of course not, but, I mean, blokes do that to women all the time, don't they? And to be fair, women do it too. Do it to men too. Sometimes, I agreed. But it doesn't leave men with the same black mark on their reputation and the deep feeling of self-loathing. And anyway, I added, it's usually because a man has done it to her first. Helen looked at me thoughtfully, then lowered his eyes. Men are competitive, I said. They have to make girls easy in order to value each other's conquests. And that's why the laws are there, so that you're old enough to be able to handle it emotionally if it happens to you. I paused. So that you're not at an age where it's going to rip up your life and tear it into 1,000 pieces. I could see tears forming in Helen's eyes. He exploited us, Hel, I persisted. He used both of us. And as soon as we gave him what he wanted, the challenge was over. In his eyes, he'd won a prize that was no longer worth having. We were solid goods. And he wanted good girls, nice little 14-year-old virgins, but we didn't know that, I continued. We were too young to know that, and so we blamed ourselves. And you know what? He was banking on that. He was banking on being able to make us feel the same level of repulsion towards ourselves that he now felt towards us, because that's how men like him see women. Except we weren't women, we were girls. Okay, but this was, 25 years ago? It was still against the law, Hel. Even then, we should have gone to the police, and we didn't. But you know what? I leaned forward. It's not too late. We can do it now. What? Are you kidding me? No, I'm serious. She looked uncertain. Will the police even care? I mean, you said yes to him, T. We let him have sex with us. It's not like he raped us, is it? It doesn't matter. It's a criminal offence. Even back then, you could go to jail for it. Ellen frowned. And would he still go to jail for it now, after all this time? I don't know that for sure, I confessed, but people do, don't they? Look at all these historic cases. Jeffrey Epstein, Max Clifford. It's in the news all the time. But that's different, she said. Surely these victims were forced, or at least they didn't want it to happen. I didn't want it to happen, Hel. Did you? Helen thought about this for a moment. No, I didn't. Not like that. Me neither, I told her. I loved him, and I didn't want to lose him. But I didn't have sex with him because I wanted to. I did it because he kept asking me, and then he wasn't asking anymore. He was just doing it. And when I stopped him from doing it, he accused me of leaving him on. And I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of him turning back on me. He said he'd bought me stuff and taken me places, and that I owed him. And I believed him when he said that. Why wouldn't I believe what he told me? He was grown up when I was a child. She nodded, swallowed. It was the same for me. I picked up a wine glass and took a long sip. Looked at her. Waited. I knew it was against the law, she murmured. I knew we shouldn't have, because we were underage, you know. But I thought that law was for rapists. Men who force themselves on you, and older men, I mean. Well, he wasn't that much older than us, was he? I've checked, I told her. He's 48 now. That would have made him 24 at the time. He was old enough to know that it was illegal to have sex with us. So how did he think he was going to get away with it? He did get away with it, Hel, I said. He's got away with it for nearly 25 years. I just mean, because that's the way the world was then, I told her, and still is to a degree. If a woman had sex and then got dumped, she was a slapper. If a man had sex and moved on to someone else, he was a stud. Someone to look up to. He's got away with women. That's what they'd say. Except that we weren't women, we were girls. It was so cold, Helen said softly, tears beginning to run down her cheek. This was like you said. It was cold and rough. Same, I said. It made me feel like I was nothing. A piece of meat, I nodded. But I'd say yes to that, apparently. But you didn't, I said. Not to that. We fell silent. He didn't even tell me not to tell anyone, I said, after the moment. Me neither. I shook my head. He was that confident when he told us to get out of the van and go home and stop calling him that we would hate ourselves too much to tell anyone. And he was right. That's exactly what happened. Until all the kids at school found out, of course, called us slags and made it our fault. And then, no matter how hard you try, he creeps back in, over and over, and makes you hate yourself again, over and over, for the rest of your life. Helen sniffed and wiped tears away with her sleeve. I took hold of her hand across the tabletop. It's the kind of things that stays with you. makes you sabotage your life. Well, she swallowed and licked another teardrop from the corner of her mouth. I keep on going for the bad guys, she said. It's like I'm repeating what happened, trying to make it turn out differently the next time. Definition of madness, I smiled. She smiled back, weakly. I got up and fetched a fresh paper towel from the kitchen and handed it to her, then crouched down, wrapped my arms around her, and laid my head on her shoulder. You said he didn't make you, I said. She sniffed, nodded. Well, he did. He did make you. He formed you. You were gullible, young, and in love. You'd have done anything he wanted. He made you into someone who would have sex with him, and then into someone who would have sex with anyone else who asked after that. Because once he'd taken away what you wanted and spat you out, there was nothing left of you, the original you. Didn't you see? He took the good bits of you and mangled them up and threw the rest of them away. She nodded, unable to speak. You weren't who you were going to be yet. You didn't have a chance to be who you should have been. He came along and changed all that. She nodded again. And so now, I got up from my crouching position, walked back round the table and sat down in my seat in front of her. We're going to find him, and we are going to get you, the old you, and me back. Chapter 28. We didn't have to find him, of course, or even look for him. Jeremy Allen Seeger was exactly where he had always been, hiding in plain sight. Not that he had been hiding from us, nor would it have crossed his mind to do so. We were no threat to him and his comfortable existence. We were just the dirty little slags he disposed of when he was a good-looking man in his 20s who sang in a band by night, while by day he worked his way up in the bank. He called himself Jen in those days. He lived in New Lewisham and messed around with car engines and at a lockup at weekends. But I remembered he'd had a good job because he always had money, and he never stayed up too late on a weekday night. He'd told us that he was going places, that he was going to be rich one day, and now, as a CEO of a leading international bank in the city, he was never going to hide his light under a bushel. The online images I'd seen of him on a podium with his wife and daughter were the first of many that Helen and I would pore over in days to come. He'd come a long way, and he was proud of it, as his beaming face and interviews were in the business media made abundantly clear. No doubt he was still himself as a bit of a rock star, and still had the looks to carry it off. He may have worked hard to get where he is, but life was kind to him, and it made me stick to my stomach. My own father, who had worked at a manual job as a builder, he was bald at 30 and could barely bend due to slip discs in the back, but there was no signs of wear or tear on Jerry Seeger's face or his body. He looked like the cat that had got the cream in every photo, and I didn't doubt for one moment that it wasn't an act. The wear and tear was there on Helen's face, though. I looked up at her as she stared at the online images, her face pale, her knuckles white as they gripped the seat of the sofa underneath her. The wear and tear had devastated my best friend's life, and while that bastard was still climbing his way up the corporate ladder, I, too, had been left with an open wound that I'd spent my life hiding in a corner, licking like a frightened little mouse. But I was no longer a mouse. I was lying. I was a ticking time bomb ready to explode. Chapter 29. A door slammed in the distance. Maddie opened her eyes, turned her head slowly towards the clock on the bedside table, and squinted at the luminous numbers. Oh my God, it was 4:15. 4:15 in the afternoon. A whole day wasted. A whole day with work piling up, washing and shopping to do, and the kitchen a mess. And now here was Emily, home from school. She opened her eyes fully. The smallest sliver of sunlight was seeping under the blind. It hurt her eyes, but she kept them open. She needed to pull herself together. Get up. Go down and say hello to her daughter. Find out about her day. Emily was below her in the kitchen now, opening cupboards and slamming them shut. Every slam on the cupboard door felt as though it was a head that was being slapped. Mum! Emily's voice called up the stairs. Maddie propped herself up onto her one elbow and squinted across the room. She no longer felt nauseous, but felt weak, and she could feel the pain still hovering in the back of her head and down her neck. She needed to go carefully. She hadn't eaten all day, she realised, and she didn't want to faint again. She still had the bruise from where her head had hit the floor. She inched over towards the edge of the bed and lowered a foot onto the rug. The gentle weave hugged her toes. It felt good, solid, safe and warm. Maddie closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and slid her foot back and forth. If you could just stay like this for a minute or two in the quiet, still, empty room, then... Mum! Emily called again. Coming! Maddie croaked. She trod tentatively over the creaking floorboards towards the bedroom door and opened it, screwing her eyes up tight against the glare of sunlight that was streaming through the landing window, casting a spell of light in the carpet outside the door. Emily was halfway up the stairs. Mum, can I... She broke off, taking sight of her mother. Her face fell. Why aren't you dressed? She asked. Maddie glanced down at her bare legs, at her knickers and skinny top, and grabbed a towel from the hanging over the banister to dry. I was just going to have a bath, she said shakily. Did you have a good day? Have you been in bed? Just a nap, Maddie lied. Why? Emily asked, a tiny flicker of fear crossing her face. What's wrong with you, Mum? Nothing, Maddie said reasonably. I just didn't sleep well last night. I'm feeling much better now. What is it you want, love? There's no milk. I just wanted to ask what there was to eat. Rosie's here, she added, but it's okay. We can go to the shop. Wait, Maddie racked her brain. There wasn't much in, she knew. I think there might be some pizzas in the freezer, she suggested brightly. I'll come down and have a look. It's okay, Mum, Emily said. Don't worry. But Maddie did worry. Ever since she's fainted, Emily's demeanour towards her had changed. She was still just as secretive, just as unreachable, but she dialed down the teenage tantrums, the arguments, the challenging behaviour. Maddie almost missed it. She knew that it wasn't the normal run of things for a daughter to be creeping around her like this. Honestly, Em, I'm fine. Just give me a minute. She turned and walked into her room to dress. But a moment later, Emily was at the foot of the stairs again, calling her. Mum, we're going out. Wait, where are you going? Maddie pulled a sundress over her head and stepped out onto the landing. What about your pizza? It'll take too long. Don't worry, we'll get something out. But you don't have any money, Maddie protested. Yes, I do. Where did you get it? A pause. Rosie's got some. But, come on, let's go, Emily was saying to Rose, who was hovering out of the sight. She turned the latch on the front door and stepped outside. Em, wait, Maddie called, leaning over the banister, clutching at it. She felt lightheaded. Dad will be leaving the office soon. I'll call him. Ask him to pick up something on the way home. It's okay, Mum, Emily said, irritation creeping into her voice. I told you, we're going out. Maddie watched desperately as Rosie shuffled into view and bolted out the door. Maddie heard it slam shut, and the house fell silent. Where were they going, she wondered. She and Rosie. To the shop to buy a load of sugary treats of zero nutritional value? No doubt. But after that... She sighed and walked into the bathroom, turned on both of the taps, and sat down in her favourite wicker chair to wait for the bath to run. The rush of water into the tub was soothing. She placed the cold flannel over her forehead and rested the back of her head against a soft pile of towels on the shelf behind her, letting them take the weight of her skull. She closed her eyes and imagined the pressure of water pushing her thoughts away down the plug hole. But moments later, as she stepped out of her underwear into the steamy water and sank down the bubbles, the chatter in her head started up again. Emily had told him that the relationship with a cousin of Brodie's was over, and Maddie wanted to trust her daughter, but she couldn't help but worry. For a start, Emily never seemed to need money. She rarely asked her parents for it, and neither she nor Rosie had part-time jobs. yet Maddie had found some packed sweets, biscuits, crisps, and fizzy drinks in her bedroom on numerous occasions. She hadn't found alcohol again, thank goodness, but 2 days ago she found a bottle of vape juice in the top drawer of Emily's desk. She challenged Emily about it, and Emily swore it wasn't hers. It was Brodie's, she said. His parents were getting suspicious, so he'd asked her to look after it for him. Buddy had accepted her explanation, and it had come the next day, but it didn't stop her backsliding into doubt and suspicion. It didn't stop her lying awake at night. She hadn't told Dan about the vape juice, nor had she voiced her suspicions about where Emily was getting her money from. It would lead to a big confrontation, and Maddie knew that this was what would only drive Emily further away from them. She, at least, still had an open line of communication with their daughter, Albert, at time. A tenuous one. Although Emily's attachment to her mother had only recent months had been expressed. For the most part, through challenges and arguments, Maddie knew this was all part of Emily still needing her, whereas she could tell that Emily felt smothered by her father's love, and in truth, Maddie could understand that. Dan just didn't seem to get that their daughter wasn't 10 anymore. Was that what this was, though? The realization seeped into her as she sunk deeper into the scalding water. Maybe it would have been better for Emily if there had been another child to take the weight of her father's love. Working from home, as she had done since Emily was born, Maddie had been the one to hand down the discipline while Dan had worked his way up at the bank. She had enabled Dan to play good cop to her bad cop, so that when he came home he could be the fun parent, the one to give Emily nothing but love, never a cross word, never a frown. Now, though, in contrast, Dan was almost too hard on Emily. He couldn't let go, didn't know when to back off, and Emily reacted angrily to any form of discipline from her. So maybe this was a reaction to the intensity of Dan's feelings for her. Maybe this boyfriend was Emily's way of breaking away from them, which meant that there was still every chance that he might lure her back. Maddie stepped out of the bath and put a towel around her head, carefully not to wrap it so tight to set the headache off again, then brushed her teeth and went into the bedroom to get dressed. As she did so, she heard the front door open. She felt herself tense up. Emily or Dan? Dan's voice called out to her, and she felt a twinge of disappointment. She was glad he was home, of course she was, but she knew she wouldn't be able to unwind and let the after effects of headaches wear off until her daughter was safely back at the house. Chapter 30. Helen opened the door and came into the living room. She'd heard my phone ring, and she waited for me to finish the call. Don't tell me. You've got work. She half smiled, half frowned. I'm sorry, I said. It's just typical. But I could really use the money. Besides, you know what it's like when you're temping. If you say no, you're the last person they call next time. It's okay. Of course you have to take it. But what do I do about today? I hesitated. Would you go, Hell? And then I'll go at the weekend. She looked upset. You want me to go to the police station by myself? I'll go too, first thing on Saturday, I promised. Why can't I wait and go on Saturday with you? Because, I looked into her eyes, pleading with her, because we have an appointment, and one of us needs to be there. If either of us turns up today, the police might not take us seriously. They might not take us seriously anyway. Why wouldn't they? He committed an offence, Hell, and they gave us an appointment, didn't they? Helen didn't look convinced. The sooner we get things moving, the better, I said gently. If you go today, then it's happening. I started. It started. They might even want to talk to me tonight, and then he might even get arrested tomorrow. Just imagine him being arrested. I felt excited. Think of him being handcuffed, locked up in a prison cell. I know, Helen said. That does feel good, but you're scared. I get that. I am too. But we have to be brave, Hel. I'd rather we went together. She sank down onto the sofa and heaved a sigh. It was a long time ago, she said. What if they don't believe us? Then we'll track down Sid and Tommy, and Tony Leach. will give the police their names, and they'll have to give a statement. Can they do that for someone? I think so, but you're not sure. Not completely, I admitted, but I'll check. And anyway, it doesn't matter. There's two of us. They'll have to believe us if we're both saying the same thing. I looked down at the time on my phone. I needed to get to work. I hadn't washed or brushed my teeth yet. I needed to pack some lunch and find something to wear. Helen's face softened. Go on, she said. Go on and get ready. And you'll go? She pursed her lips and nodded. I smiled gratefully at her, then leaped up the sofa. I turned in the doorway. You have a driver's license, right? Yes. Take my car, I said. I don't need it today. I'll call my insurance company in my lunch break and get you added to the policy. And then you can use it whenever you like. Really? I saw her eyes light up. Absolutely. Why don't you use it to pick up the rest of your stuff later? Take your time. Go to Matt's and drop off some stuff there. Whatever you want to do. It's all fine. Wow, I really appreciate that, T, she said. And I'll keep the appointment. I promise. I'll go. Great. It'll be much quicker in the car. And if you park in the monastery of King Street, it's only like a 5-minute walk from there. Okay. I hesitate in the doorway. I won't let you down, T, she said. Ass down. I'll be thinking of you, I said, all day. I power walked to the Lancaster Gate and down the Central Line. The law firm I was trying to be working for had its main offices in Canal Street, not far from London Bridge. As luck would have it, the tube pulled in just as I arrived and got to work on time. I was greeted with a quick induction and a long schedule of printing and scanning demands from the firm's many associates. My job was to print off all the letters and their multiple attachments and put them into envelopes ready to go out in the post. The work was monumentous, but on the plus side, the printer was situated on the landing on the 5th floor next to a huge floor-to-ceiling window with an amazing view out across the Thames. In the distance was the South Bank with the Borough Market, Southwark Cathedral and Clinic, and the old prison, now a museum, which I'd visit on a boring wet Sunday the previous year. But as I look across the water, I could remember the ghoulish expressions on the faces of the prisoners whose heads had been chopped off and stuck on pikes. While I worked, I entertained myself by imagining the look on his face as the police knocked on his door, arrested him, and marched him off to the slammer. I imagined his eyes bulging out of his sockets with the same expression of fear and surprise. Helen's appointment was at 2. At around 3 I sneaked off to the toilet and tried calling her, but there was no answer. There was no reply either to any of the messages I sent. When 5 o'clock came, I hurried down the stairs and out of the doors and headed for the bank, where I got onto a crowded tube train. By 6, I was walking up the street to my flat. My stomach turned in anticipation as I saw that my car was sitting outside in a different parking spot, facing the other way. This had to mean that Helen had been to the police station and was now back home again. I pushed my key into the lock and opened the door, kicked off my shoes and walked into the living room. Helen was sitting on the sofa in silence, hugging her knees. George appeared through the cat flap and meowed at my legs, but I couldn't take my eyes off Helen. Something was wrong. What happened? I asked, sitting opposite her. Nothing, she said. What do you mean, nothing? They can't do anything. The police, she nodded. But why? It was too long ago. No, it wasn't, I cried out. They prosecuted these things all the time. Old stuff. Stuff that had happened in the 80s and 90s. You hear all over the news victims reporting rapes after 20 years because they've been too afraid to come forward. Rapes, yes, this wasn't rape. I know, but... I blinked at her. It was still a criminal offence. It doesn't matter. It wasn't rape. He didn't force us. We were underage. He didn't have to. We were over 13. It's not rape if you're over 13. If you're over 13 and he didn't force you, there's a law. You had to report it within a year of it happening. So that's it. We're too late. This can't be right. It is, but... Tate. Her voice was sharp, angry. It's the fucking law, alright? Okay, but you don't believe me? Of course I do. Just what? I just wonder if you'd know. I looked up at her, told them everything. She looked back at me, her eyes blazing. You want to know what I told them? She hissed. You want me to go over it all again? You don't have to tell me, I said quickly. I just wondered. Yes, Tate, she said abruptly. The answer to your question is yes. I told them everything, every single detail I had to. She let out an outlandish, high-pitched crackle. I gave them a blow-by-blow account, you could say. Hell, it's okay. She leaned forward. I told them how I let a man fuck me when I was still just a schoolgirl. I told them where it happened, how it happened, but no, that wasn't enough. They wanted me to be more explicit, so I had to use the words like penis and vagina. I had to use those words like cum and mouth and fucking saw. Helen, I pleaded, please stop. To a stranger, Tate. Tears sprang to her eyes. I had to say all those intimate, disgusting things to a complete stranger. I'm sorry, Hel. They made me go through everything in graphic detail over and over. Her voice broke into sobs. It was like it was happening all over again. Oh, hell. And then, when they finally were satisfied, they got me to sit in a room by myself for 2 whole hours. 2 hours I sat there, replaying it all in my head, remembering how disgusting it was, how humiliated, how filthy, how used I felt when I got me onto my hands and knees naked in the back of the van and fucked me like I was a dog. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Hel. I told him all that, she groaned out loud, as I was physically in pain. And then they came back 2 hours later and told me they weren't going to do anything. I went through all that for nothing. For nothing. And all I wish now is that I'd listened to myself instead of listening to you. Why did I listen to you? She put her head inside her knees. Her hair fell down over them, and I reached out to soothe it back. But she smacked my hand away. I'm sorry, Hel, I said, in tears myself. I'm so sorry that I didn't come with you. I'm so sorry you went through all that alone. I've let you down. Again. She didn't look up. I felt better when I was just fucking my life up. At least you had a life to fuck up, I thought. I've never even had a boyfriend, I blurted out. She looked up slowly, her eyes tired, her cheeks streamed with tears. What? Ever? I swallowed. No. Why not? I shrugged. I just never, not since him. You've never had, she trailed off, anyone. I took a deep breath and shook my head. She waited. There were men who liked me, I said. There was one who really liked me, and he was nice, but I got scared. The thought of being that close to someone, it made me run the other way. Are you gay? She asked. I don't know. I don't think so. I like men. I think about them. I enjoy their company, but then, when something starts to happen, I always make an excuse. Because of him? I don't know. I just can't seem to trust anyone. I feel safer on my own, but at the same time, I'm lonely. It's like I can't win. I want someone, but I can't bear to be touched that way. She looked at me, saying nothing. He did those things to me too, I said finally. Making me give him oral sex and making me, touch myself while he watched and moving me into different positions and, from behind. My, my voice sounded reedy and odd as I stumbled over the vocabulary, trying to find the language. It was as though I was 14 again, trying to find the words for something that had happened to me that it didn't fully understand. It hadn't been anything really terrible that he'd done to me, but it was terrible because I'd been 14 and because there was no love there, and because it had been and felt so fucking cold. It was like I was auditioning for a job as a porn star, I said, acting out some kind of role to please him. I felt alien, bizarre, like it wasn't even me. Afterwards I felt disgusted with myself because I'd let him. I blamed myself. How could I have let him? But I know now that I was just trying to pass an audition to be his girlfriend, not a porn star. I didn't want to those things. It wasn't me. Helen nodded. I know, nor me. I felt sick when I looked up again and told her I was sick. I didn't want to remember it at all. All I wanted was to bury it, and I never wanted to put you through any of this. But I've tried, and you've tried to get it over it, and we can't help. And once you know that, you can't unknow that. We have to do something. We can't just sit back and let him continue to fuck up our lives. Helen wiped her eyes. twisted her body to face me, and put her feet down on the floor. I'm not having it, I said, anger rising inside me. I brought my fist down heavily on the arm of the chair. I screamed out loud, I'm not having it, I'm not fucking having it. Helen looked alarmed. I'm not going to let them dismiss what happened to us for a second time. So, what are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to find him. I'm going to make him pay. Her eyes widened. How? I'm not sure. I need to think. But you did all that you did for me, for us, and now it's my turn. And they're not going to do anything about it. Then I will. Chapter 31. I took a breath, reached for my glass. We've drunk the last of the champagne. It's 5 in the afternoon, and I feel like an alcoholic, as well as a whore, as Sarah asks. Do you want another drink? Helen was right. Saying those things out loud to a complete stranger feels debasing, degrading. It makes me feel less, somehow, damaged. Doesn't that mean flawed? Less vulnerable? Less dateable? Damaged? It's ironic. I reflect how that word, with all its negative connotations, is used to describe the person who has been broken instead of the person who smashed them up. So, yes, I do want another drink. I'll get it, I say. No, she puts her hand out, touches mine. Please, let me. She catches the waiter's eye, and he comes straight over. He brings a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and some salted peanuts. Sarah has a soda and lime. The police were right, Sarah says, when the waiter has gone. Because that happened to you in the 1990s, it would fall under the old 1956 Sexual Acts Officers Act. It set a 12-month time limit for 14 and 15-year-old female victims to report acts of unlawful sex. It's an anomaly which hasn't been put right by the new law, even though there's no time limit to report an equivalent offence. So, if it happened now, he'd been guilty of grooming, abuse of trust, and sexual activity with a child under 16. He could get up to 14 years in prison. I already know this, of course, I looked it up. She adds, the police used to go get round it by prosecuting it as incident assaulted instead, which had no time limit. But a 2004 House of Lords case closed down that avenue. So no one cares, I say. It's unjust, I agree. There's no academics and lawyers who agree to, but no one cares enough to fight it and change the law. It's way up at the tip of the very big iceberg, Sarah says. The whole system is in crisis. The prosecution of sexual assaults of women is at an all-time low. I survey her in silence, feeling both vindicated and aggravated at the same time. So, you got a job at the bank at CPF? She asks. Am I right? Yes. Working for Dan? Yes. And was that job just by chance working for him, I mean? Yes. And the relationship between you, there wasn't one. So the affair, it was never real. No. What about Helen? What about her? Did she ever have a relationship with her? No. So, why? I can see her mind whirling. It was all part of the plan. Well, I corrected myself. Not the original plan. And what was that? To bring in a wrecking ball to demolish Jerry's nice, comfortable life, to gain the friendship and trust of his colleagues, and then stand up at the company meeting, ask him if he remembered me, announce what he did, tell his wife and daughter, make him regret that he ever walked into the wreck that day and met me and Helen. But he didn't do that, any of that. No. I licked my lips. The plan changed. How? Why? I met Maddie. She raises her eyebrows. You knew Maddie? I nod. My heart feels heavy, though it's a relief to tell her. Maddie was my friend, I say. Chapter 32. Part 5. Getting a job at CPF wasn't too difficult. I had a few things in my favour, including A-level French. It was early July, and the summer holidays were looming, the time when most companies were short-staffed, or about to be, and might need an office dog's body. I made it clear in my application that I was willing to do pretty much anything I was asked. I'd stuff envelopes and deliver the post, unjam the photocopier and make the tea. I'd set out chairs for meetings, run errands for the PAs. I was presentable, hard-working, and ultimately ambitious. though not adverse to taking orders from colleagues younger than me. I wanted to become a political secretary, I told them, specialising in international finance, but I knew that I would have to start at the bottom. I first needed to improve both my typing speed and my French. That said, I made it clear it was good enough to translate simple letters and answer the phone to the overseas partners and associates. An advantage that, from the pay grade I was seeking, was enough to get them to notice me. They had nothing permanent right now, they responded, but they liked my application. Could I come in and meet them? I agreed readily, and although I applied directly, speculatively, gave them almost nothing to lose, but suggesting that, subject to the interview of course, they try me out on a temporary basis through the agency. While I waited for them to find a convenient date to meet, I brushed up my French, I read French novels, watched French movies on Netflix, I spent a few summers in French as a teenager, and soon it all came flooding back. I watched YouTube tutorials and learned banking terminology in both English and French. By the day of the interview, I was as prepared as I ever would be. I arrived early. I'd have my hair styled and was wearing my best suit. As I went through the doors into the building, signed in with security, then ascended in the lift of the 19th levels, my nerves started to get the better of me. My interviewers were friendly, and when they led one of the partners began the interview with "Bonjour, comment allez-vous?" I quickly rose to the challenge and responded confidently. In the conversation that ensued, I even managed to make a joke about assets and liabilities that made the same partner smile and shake my hand warmingly at the end when I stood up to leave. When the agency called to say that CPF had an opening for me on a temporary but potentially long-term basis, Helen and I celebrated with a bottle of Laurent Perrier. I handed a glass to her and grinned mischievously. "What?" Helen grinned back at me. And so again, I showed her the online photo of the Nemesis standing on the podium, receiving a boxed bottle of the same champagne. We clinked glasses, and after we drank that champagne, and followed it with a second bottle of something less expensive, she confessed to being both impressed and a little shocked by how calm and calculated I could be. I'd achieved the goal I'd set for myself through sheer grit and determination, she said. "Not talent?" I asked. After all, I just auditioned for and landed the biggest acting role of my career. "Talent, of course," she agreed, and told me that she couldn't have done what I'd done. I think from that point on, she really started to believe in me. That same week, my neighbour 2 floors up, Claire Henry, told us that she'd been offered a job teaching English abroad. She asked if Helen might want to look after her flat for her for a year or so while she was away overseas. It was perfect timing. Helen was now working for an estate agent in Bloomsbury and could afford the rent, and while we didn't want to lose each other's company, the makeshift bed in the living room had just started to become a little challenging for both of us in terms of the lack of space and privacy. So, it was a double celebration that evening, and I marked it with a promise to Helen that justice, no matter how rough, would be done. We spent that evening thinking up new and different acts of revenge against Jerry, including having Helen turn up at the office party and seduce him, handcuff him, tie him up naked and dangle him from the desk. But we knew that wasn't going to cut it. It was far too trivial. He needed to be exposed in a far more insidious way for the kind of man he really was. I started my new job in the first week of August, but I didn't finally meet Jerry until 2 weeks later. I found out from one of the secretaries that he was on holiday in south of France with his family, and I took the opportunity of offering to clear out some boxes from his office, making sure to have a poke around while I was there. His room was big, around 20 square meters, with plush carpets and a view of St. Paul's. There was a 3-seater couch, big enough to sleep on along one wall, and in the corner of the cabinet housing a compact fridge and a coffee machine. Next to it was a tray with mugs, tea, coffee, large lamps of crystal sugar, and small packets of Italian biscuits. It was clearly like a hotel room, and the thought hit me like a thunderbolt. Did he bring young girls here? Too risky, maybe, but for the very first time I realised that Helen and I might have been the only ones. I'd been seen full of self-loathing, convinced what had happened was our fault, mine and Helen's, that what he'd done was acceptable, and that what we'd done was not, that this possibility hadn't even entered my mind. My gut twisted as my eyes scanned his desk and landed on the photo of his wife and daughter. There were several more photos, all portraying him as the epitome of the family man. But a leopard doesn't change its spots, does it? And even though he was now in his late 40s, he was still good looking and presumably just as charming. And now, of course, he had the additional allure of status, money, and power. Was he still preying on young girls even now? If so, then was wholly defensible. Maybe I could catch him at it, nail him, send him to prison, even if it was too late for any kind of illegal retribution from me or Helen. The idea was thrilling. Did he still have a van? I wondered. I recalled his story about how he was in a band and how he needed the van to lug over their gear around. I'd seen the large black cases that housed a drum kit in the lockup a few times, but I'd only ever seen a mattress in the back of the van, somewhere to sleep after gigs in the far-flung crisis, he told us. But I wondered, now, if the band was just a cover story, whether he was, in fact, even then, a serial paedophile. On the Saturday night before Monday, he was due to return to the office. I couldn't sleep. All those weeks and months when, as a schoolgirl, I'd lain awake mourning him, fantasizing him, about what it would be like to see him, to talk to him again. And now, finally, it was about to happen. Of course he'd never recognized me. I was now a 38-year-old woman named Tate Kinsella. The last time he'd seen me, I'd been a freckled 14-year-old named T. McGee. But even if he did remember, that would just add to the fun, wouldn't it? He'd be alarmed, scared, even. He'd wonder if my presence at the firm was anything more than sheer coincidence. But he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. How could he? But as it turned out, when I bumped into him, he was barely even acknowledged my existence. I'd been nothing to him, while he'd been everything to me. I was far too average looking, too junior in the firm, but too old, no doubt. I reflected bitterly, to be of any interest to him. No matter. I'd use that to my advantage, make it my business to keep my ears open and my eyes peeled. I'd find every scrap of dirt on him. There was no hurry, I decided. I'd take my time. Revenge is a dish best served cold, as they say, and I wanted to be as cold as I can be. Chapter 33. They say you can tell what kind of a person someone is by the way they talk to waiters. I don't think anyone has ever said that about office temps. But after a few weeks of working at CPF, I'd begun to apply the analogy. I hadn't got anywhere close to building up the degree of friendship and trust among my colleagues that I'd advised when I'd come up with my master plan. Although no one was exactly rude to me, the associates were, for the most part, too self-absorbed, and the secretaries too busy to invest in what they no doubt perceived was only going to be a short term. Beyond the scope of giving me orders and thanking me for my phone messages, very little attention was paid to me, and I'd begun to feel somewhat invisible. So Maddie walked into the office and we struck up a conversation. I was more than ready for a bit of company. I liked her immediately. She was unlike the other wives of the parents and managers. She was gentle, modest, self-effacing even, and beautiful in a natural, make-up-free, slightly scattered, brained way. That's how it first appeared to me. Anyway, it was a hot day at the end of August. I was the only staff member on the floor, having been left to answer the phones while the first staff that weren't away on holidays went to a departmental meeting. I looked up as she came in. She was around my height, 5 feet 7 or 6, and she was wearing a blue and white floral dress. Her bare legs were pale, and she had on white trainers, no socks. Her streaky blonde hair hung loose and a little untidily around her shoulders, exposing, as I observed when she came closer, a few dark roots and more than a touch of grey. She opened the door to Dan's office and poked her head inside before turning around and noticing me. "Are you looking for Dan?" I asked her. "Yes, have you seen him?" "He's in a meeting upstairs," I said. "Up on the 18th. Is it urgent? Shall I call him?" No. She waved her arms dismissively. I'm just his wife." Then she smiled at what she'd said and pulled a world-weary experience. "I'm no one important. I'm just his wife." "That's okay." I smiled back. "I'm just a temp. The office junior. I'm generally insignificant." She laughed and walked over to where I was sitting and held out my hand. I took it. "I'm Maddie," she said. "I'm Tate." She looked at me carefully. "Like Kate, but with a T," I clarified. "Like the art gallery?" "That's it." She nodded, then frowned. "Is that crap? Like the art gallery? Does everyone say that?" "No, they don't. And I don't mind anyway. It's a stupid name." She wrinkled her nose. "I like it. It's strong, solid, fearless." "Wow," I said. "I hope I can live up to all of that." She pulled a desk chair towards her and sat down opposite me. She blew her fringe up, away from her face, and took a few deep breaths, her chest rising and falling heavily. Her eyes, I noticed, had dark shadows underneath. It had been a blistering day, and, in spite of the air con in the building, I felt her exhaustion. The previous night had been sweltering and uncomfortable. Tonight would be the same. "Ridiculous, isn't it?" I said. "The heat." "Unnecessary," she agreed, contouring her features as if to imply that someone had made a poor managerial decision. "Completely unnecessary." I laughed, and she relaxed her expression, her eyes twinkling back at me. She dropped her bag onto the floor beside her. It was lovely, large and shiny. A top-handled bucket bag in the pretty pink and grey. Designer, no doubt. Had to be. "I like your bag," I said. "Thank you. Whose is it?" She looked at me confused. "Mine?" "I meant which designer." "Oh, she frowned. "That one that makes all the fake designer handbags. The name escapes me." I laughed again, and grinned back at me, and she grinned back at me. "Can I get you a drink?" I offered. "Tea or a coffee?" "Some water would be great." But as I slid back my chair, she pushed herself to her feet. "Water cooler?" she said. "I know where it is." "I can get it," I protested. "No," she said firmly. "I can guarantee you do enough running around after these lot. You're not to run around after me." "I don't mind." "I know you don't, but I'll go. Do you want some?" She seemed determined not to trouble me, so I told her that I did. I watched as she went across the room and into the corridor, leaving her handbag on the floor opposite me. Ridiculously, I felt befriended. She was so nice, so kind and attentive. She was quite literally the only person I've met since I've worked at the bank with whom I'd felt any kind of connection. And she trusted me with her bag, hadn't she? The phone rang and I answered it. It was one of the finance directors from the Paris St. George's branch on the 9th arrondissement. He wanted to speak to our head of funds. I explained that she was in a meeting upstairs, but I passed the message on. I just put the phone down when I heard an almighty bang. I looked up, and over the glass double doors to the corridor there appeared to be a streak of water. I could just about make out Maddie's blue and white floral dress momentarily behind the glass. I leaped out of my seat and ran into the corridor. Maddie was standing in front of me, looking dazed and confused. There was 2 empty plastic cups on the floor. "What happened?" I asked, looking at Maddie through the glass door. "I'm so stupid," I said. "I thought I'd left the doors open." "You walked right into them." She nodded. "Oh my God, are you hurt?" She lifted one hand and rubbed her temple. "I'm okay. Don't worry, I didn't realise. What an idiot." "Not at all. Could have happened to anyone," I told her, although secretly I was uncertain how. The glass along the wall was expansive and also spotless clean, but the doors had frosted white circles along the rims and silver handles that you couldn't really miss. Come and sit down, I said, reaching out my hand. I'll get you some water, then I'll call security. Get someone to clean this up. No, Maddie said abruptly. Please, don't call anyone. I'll do it. Just let me where I can find the cloth. You don't need to do it, I argued. No one's going to ask what happened. It's just a bit of water. No one's going to care. I know, but please. She lifted her eyes to meet mine. Please don't tell anyone. I feel so clumsy, so embarrassed. But why? I frowned. I don't want to worry Dan. I haven't been too well lately, she confessed, her eyes looking up to mine. So, please, can we just keep this between us? Absolutely, I agreed. I leaned down and picked up the cups. Come on, I said. I'll clean it up. If anyone comes, I'll say it was me. That's what I get for wearing heels I can't walk in, I added, and shook my head as if with the benefit of hindsight. Maddie's eyes moved down to the ballerinas and then back at mine. I changed out of them after I tripped, I said, obviously. The hint of a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, as she looked at me silently, gratefully. Come on, I coaxed her, and she allowed me to usher her back to the seat near my desk. I went out to the toilets, fetched a wad of paper towel, and wiped up the water from the glass as best as I could. I then fetched more water from the cooler, went back inside and handed Maddie a cup. She thanked me and took it, one hand still on her temple. Have you got a bump? I asked her. A little one, she said. She gave her hand one last rub and dropped her hand on her lap. But I'm okay, she paused. I get migraines, I get dizzy, double visions. You should tell Dan, he already knows. I mean, about today, just to be safe. You shouldn't go home on your own. I'll be fine. Look, I was just walking too fast, and don't worry, I'll go carefully. I nodded. Thank you, though. I appreciate your concern. She moistened her lips and said, Dan's about to be promoted to the board of directors. I heard, I smiled. Congratulations. Thank you. The thing is, this wouldn't look good for him. Why wouldn't it? I asked, confused. You know, my head aches. But he wouldn't want his colleagues to know that he has any issues in his personal life. Really? I frowned. She nodded. Yes. This sounded ridiculous to me. Not sure meant to discriminatory. But what do I know? She would have far better insight into the workings of the company for me than me. So, I'll tell him later. Her eyes were still on mine, in private, if that's okay. Well, of course it is, I agreed. She smiled. Thanks, Tate, and I'm really sorry to have interrupted your day. You haven't interrupted anything. I've literally got nothing to do except answer the phone if they ring. She looked at me curiously for a second. I hope you don't mind me asking, but how come you're doing this job? I know, I sighed. It's a job for 20-year-olds, not an old woman like me. You're not old, she objected, but you are bright, too bright to be answering the phones and making tea. I was flattered. Pleased it was immediately apparent that there was a little bit more to me. I quickly embarked on my fake story, the one where the ambitions at the bank, about me willingness to learn, my poor typing speed, and my fledgling French, but I noticed that her smile had faded. She was just sitting there in silence, her eyes fixed rather disconsolately on me. I couldn't see any holes in the story I'd just given, but her reaction, or lack of one, was unsettling me. Had Dan maybe twigged that I was here under false pretense and sent his friendly wife into the office to interrogate me? I stopped talking and waited, but she still didn't speak. She just sat there, her dark, shadowy eyes fixed on me. And then they moved. Her eyes, that is. First they looked up at the ceiling, then away to her left, then her mouth curved into a strange smile, and then she fell sideways, crashed to the floor, and her body began to shake uncontrollably. Chapter 34. I dropped down onto the floor beside Maddie. put my hand on her arm and talked to her in a soothing voice. I told her that she was going to be okay, but the jerking of her limbs and the froth at the corner of her mouth were really scaring me. I stood up shakily and scanned my desktop for my phone. Maddie hadn't wanted to cause a fuss. She, and presumably Dan too, hadn't wanted his colleague to know that she was unwell. But this was an emergency, wasn't it? I had to call for an ambulance, surely. I looked over to the double doors to the corridor outside, wanting Dan to come in from the meeting and take his decision away from me. Shall I call upstairs for him? I wondered. Make up some excuse to call him out from the meeting without anyone else twigging. But there wasn't time for all that. This was serious. I needed to call 999 immediately. The call handler asked me a series of questions, and gave me a set of instructions. Don't move her, don't put anything on her mouth, no fingers, no water. Just stay with her, talk to her until the paramedics arrive. I did as I was told. I put my phone on speaker and laid it on the floor next to her. After a minute or two, Maddie stopped shaking and her eyes came back into focus. I moved her onto her side as instructed, and she let out a deep sigh and lay silent and still, her eyes looking up at me. The paramedics arrived soon afterwards, two of them, a man and a woman, followed by some security guards who stood guard at the door, so that when the rest of the staff started to filter down the meeting, they were quickly turned away, everyone except Dan, that is. He spoke briefly in the hushed tone with the security guard, then hurried over to the knelt down beside his wife. Maddie was now crying and saying, "I'm sorry," repeatedly. Dan stroked her damp hair away from her face and told her not to worry. But I could tell by the way they were with each other that there was something else behind her concern that hadn't been shared with me. We were all still on the floor level behind the desk, out of sight of both the security guard and the other staff members who had appeared at the door. An idea suddenly came to me. Does anyone know that it's Maddie who's unwell? I asked Dan. He looked up at me. She didn't want anyone else to know she was sick, I said. But does anyone know for sure that the ambulance was called for me? I don't think so, he said. I turned to the paramedics. What did you tell the security staff when you came in? They hadn't told them anything. All the door's security staff knew was that ambulance had been called to level 14 and that approximately 30 minutes earlier Maddie, who was well known to them, had been issued a visitor pass and allowed up onto the floor with me. So, let me go with her, I said to Dan, in the ambulance. Dan's eyes widened. You mean, we'll make it appear as if it's me who's unwell, and that Maddie's just going to the hospital with me. It's nearly 5, I said. Everyone will be going home soon anyway. We wait for a bit, and then we both walk out. We get into the lift, and for anyone left in the building, we make it look as though it's Maddie who's supporting me. Dan turned to the paramedic. Can my wife walk? She needed a little more time to recover, they said, but after that she could be fine to go down into the lift with me. Dan turned to Maddie. What do you think? Yes, she said. Yes, that's perfect. So that's what we did. We waited a while, and then, when Maddie was ready, walked out the corridor, past the security guard, the 5 of us, me and Maddie, in a huddle together. I played my part well, walking with a slow, frail gait, and pulling the most pained of faces. And we all got into the lift. We went down into the lobby, past a few curious faces, and through the revolving door into the street. I climbed up into the waiting ambulance with Maddie, and the paramedics got in too. As soon as they shut the door, I sat back out of the way and waited while they attended to Maddie, attaching monitors to her, check her oxygen level, her temperature, and her pulse. When they asked her if she's ever had seizures before, she glanced over at me, replying that she had. I heard her say softly, I have underlying health conditions. The male paramedics looked from Maddie to me and back again, then got out of the ambulance and shut the door. A few minutes later, the door opened and she got back in and did some more checks on Maddie, then told us that Dan had gone to pick up their daughter and that they were going to take Maddie home. Do you have to be anywhere? Maddie asked me. No. Come on then, she said. Please, come home with me. Sure, of course, I agreed. The paramedics asked us to fasten our seatbelts, and then they got into the front of the ambulance, and we moved off along East Cheap. How are you feeling? I asked Maddie. a little spaced out. She looked up at me with tired eyes. Thank you. Thank you for what you did. It was nothing, I said. No trouble at all. She studied me for a moment, sizing me up. You're a really good actress, she said. I thought you were about to kneel over at one point. I couldn't help myself. I'm actually a trained actress, I confided. No one at CPF knows. Well, that explains it, she said. You're very talented. I flushed with pride, grateful that, for once, I'd been able to show what I was capable of without having to prove my worth with a list of my TV and film credits. Thank you. No plans to give up my day job, though. She smiled and said that I should keep going, that I really had something. I asked her what she did, and she told me that she was an editor for a publishing house. I have an idea for a novel of my own, she said shyly. What's it about? I asked. Typical first novel, I suppose, based on myself, a middle-aged woman with a 14-year-old daughter. Actually, she's just turned 15. What happens? She hesitated. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I'll never write it. Don't give up on your dream, I urged her. Her eyes flickered up to meet mine. She looked as though she was about to say something, but appeared to change her mind. I could help you, I offered, feeling excited at the thought of doing something creative. My friend Helen and I used to write screenplays all the time when we were at school. Not real ones, obviously, but we loved writing them and acting them out. A screenplay, she mused, smiling faintly. Now there's an idea. I grinned. I'll help you write it, then I'll star in it. I'll play you. I could play you, right? Absolutely, she smiled and gave me a curious look, sizing me up, and said, You're a good person, Tate. So are you, I replied. Maddie's eyes twinkled at me for a moment. Then she closed them, laid her head back down against the seat, and a minute later, she was asleep. Chapter 35. The ambulance turned right on the angle and drove along Upper Street past Instalment Green. It turned into tree-lined street and then into another and stopped outside the Victorian terraced house fronted by wrought iron railings and tall, dense bushes that concealed its small front garden. I followed Maddie and the paramedics down a narrow path and through a front door with a stained glass panel, then down a traditional tiled and corniced hallway into a glossy modern kitchen dinner at the back. Once satisfied, when Maddie was comfortable, the paramedics left. I insisted that I put the kettle on while Maddie remained seated in the armchair near the patio doors leading out the garden. She agreed and closed her eyes as I found my way around the kitchen, opening and shutting drawers and cupboards until I found spoons, tea bags, and cups. Maddie, I said gently when I'd made the tea, do you want to be in bed? She opened her eyes. Will you come and sit with me? She murmured. Of course. Then yes, she said. That would be good. I followed her up the stairs with our mugs. In the bedroom, she flickered on the lamp and undressed while I placed our drinks on the bedside table and, at Maddie's suggestion, lifted a light tub chair from the corner of the room and brought it closer to the bed. Maddie got under the covers and let out a satisfied sigh, and a moment later she was dozing again. I sat and drank my tea, taking in the room. Duck egg blue voile panel curtains, a dark oak dresser, wooden floorboards, and checking my phone. There was a message from Helen asking me if I wanted to go out for dinner. I told her that something had come up and asked if she could feed George for me. Then I checked the news and answered an email. When I looked up, Maddie's eyes were open again. How are you feeling? I asked. Better, she said, a little concussed and a little ashamed. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. She propped herself up a little, taking a plump white pillow from the other side of the bed and drawing it under her head. The seizures. I haven't had that many, she said. I don't really know what to expect. Lots of people have seizures, I said. Why on earth should that reflect negatively on Dan? She reached from her tea and sipped in. It was probably lukewarm by now. I rose from my seat, about to offer to go downstairs and make another one. But she put her hand out, indicating for me to sit back down. It's not the bank, she said. What do you mean? It's not Dan's job that we're concerned about. She put her mug back down on the bedside table. It's Emily, our daughter. I look at her inquiringly. We don't want her to know that I'm this unwell. I nodded. I have a brain tumour, she said. Oh my God, I said, shocked. I'm so sorry. Is it? Can they? No. I swam with tears and blinked them away. They can't operate. It's stage 4 glioblastoma. It's the most aggressive form of brain tumour there is. The prognosis isn't good. I blinked back my own tears and swallowed. So, what are they going to do? They'll keep trying to shrink it, they said, but the treatment is mostly palliative. Tears shimmered in her eyes again. They've given me from 3 to 18 months to live. I gazed back at her, feeling awful, not knowing what to say. She wiped her eyes. Emily doesn't know. She mustn't know. Okay, I said. She thinks it's just migraines. She's at a difficult age. She's just started her GCSE year and we've had some problems with her lately. She looked up at me. Do you have kids? No, but I have nieces and nephews, I said. One of them is 15. He's always lovely to me, but I hear he gives his mum a hard time. It's normal, she says. At their age, we know that. And normal is good. Normal is what we want. We don't want to put her life on hold. We don't want to mess up her education. Dan and I talked it through, and we both felt we'd rather pretend that everything's okay for as long as we can. But she'll spend less time with you, won't she? I pointed out. I mean, less time than she would if she knew. Maddie's lower lip trembled. What 15-year-old would want to hang out with her dying mother, just waiting for it to happen? It would be tough, I agreed. I'd rather spend less time with her than it's okay, I said. I understand. I didn't have kids. What did I know? But my expression must have said otherwise, because Maddie continued to explain. We think she was seeing someone, she said. Someone wrong for her. Someone, she hesitated, older than her. We never found out who it was, but she told us it was over. And we want it to stay that way. When the time comes, we'll break it to her. But until then, we don't want to stop her living her life as normal. And we definitely don't want her to do anything to go running to him about. I was touched, a little surprised that she shared all this with me, but I guess it had been hard for her, keeping this a secret and having no one to talk to but Dan. He would have his own burden to carry, his own pain to deal with, and maybe it was easier to talk to a stranger from whom she had no responsibility, no feelings to consider. So, instead of telling her that she needed to explain that this was none of my business, that I couldn't even begin to think what I'd do in her situation, I told her that I thought I would do the same. She leaned forward, closer to me. We really can't tell anyone at the bank, she said. Dan's boss, Jerry, and his wife, Sharon, are friends of ours. They've been to our house and met Ellie numerous times, and they have a daughter at the same age, and it might slip out, and kids all talk online these days. Every child knows something who knows someone else. So we decided it would be safer to keep it simple and just not tell anyone at all. So literally no one else knows, not even your parents. Both my parents died, she said. My mum had a brain tumour too, and my dad had an early onset Parkinson's, she sighed. My chances weren't the best. I've always known that, so yes, it's just me and Dan. Now you, of course. Look, I won't breathe a word, I promise. I have no friends at the bank. There's no one for me to tell. I guessed, she blushed. I didn't mean, I know what you meant, I said soothingly. And you're right. I'm just the office temp. No one is interested in anything I have to say. But, just for the record, never have talked about anyone what happened today. I know, she said. I like you too. I feel I can trust you. I like you too, I said. And you can trust me. She gave me a thin smile. And then we heard the front door opening and the sound of voices in the hallway below. Maddie put her fingers on her lips. We sat in silence, listening. We could hear Dan's deep, low voice first, the words themselves muffled. and then the high-pitched, argumentative tone of their daughter. Dan's reply, again, reassuring, soft, low, and then the sound of Emily's thundering up the stairs. But then, as she appeared to remember what her father had just told her, the footsteps on the landing fading, and her bedroom door gently closing shut. Maddie turned to me. "Believe it or not, asked Emily on a good day," she whispered, and we both grinned. "I was the worst teenager ever," I said, and then a strange unsettling semblance of our thought popped into my head. The door opened, and Dan came into the bedroom, shutting the door behind him again. I stood up. "I'll go now," I whispered to Steve. "Save you explaining to Emily who I am and why I'm sitting in your mother's bedroom." "Thanks, Tate. I really appreciate you looking after Maddie," Dan said under his breath. "It's no problem," I said. "I'm feeling a lot better now after my funny turn." He smiled. "So, do you think you'll be well enough for work tomorrow, or will you have to have a day off? They initially didn't pay me if I didn't work, but I doubted he didn't realise that. Don't worry, I'll be there," I whispered. "Can I offer you a lift home?" "No, stay with Maddie," I insisted. I turned to say goodbye to her, then spontaneously leaned forward and hugged her instead. Maddie hugged me back, with no doubt surprised her husband, and then followed him down the stairs, and he showed me out the front door. It was 8 o'clock and getting dark outside, which caught me by surprise. It had been such a hot summer's day, and the air was still thick, yet the night was now drawing in. As I walked down the path and neared the gate to the street, I stopped to consider which route home was the best. I just plumped from walking down the angle and getting a bus along Pentonville Road when a car rounded the corner and a pair of headlights shone in my eyes. The vehicle pulled up on the other side of the road, and a face looked up the driver's seat. At first, the windows were deep in shadow. I couldn't see in, but then the door opened, a light blinked on, and a woman stepped out and looked straight towards me. Haley. It was Haley from work. What was she doing? Whatever it was, I couldn't let her see me. I was supposed to be ill. Why would I have come back to Dan and Maddie's house? I should be in hospital or at home. As she peered into Dan and Maddie's front garden, I made a split-second decision and dived into the bush. My arms were bare and the branches were rigid and unforgiving, but I wriggled my way in further and listened carefully to the sound of Haley's footsteps, our high heels click-clacking across the road up the path. A moment later, the footsteps stopped, and I heard the doorbell ring. In a swift moment, I dived back onto the grass. I clambered my feet and then ran like the wind towards the gate and out onto the street. That will be the end of this. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye guys.